Hey guys, how are you all? Welcome to. So we are back with a brand new movie on what if Naruto was jailed for 10 years, and his children were hidden from Konoha. But before we start, be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Now let's begin the story. History written by men has never been too accurate or very truthful, always swayed by the whims of the writer and the bias of society, but one thing was a clear fact even in those skewed annals. One man had turned the tides of time to his favor some 10 years ago, marching upon his neighboring countries with armies of destruction and conquest, mercilessly turning the once peaceful land of fire into an embodiment of its name. It was 10 years ago that the country of Sound, a small, seemingly insignificant scrawl on a map, had attacked every country that it did not consider an ally, tromping over them like a giant over an anthill, killing all who got in its way without distinguishing between soldier and innocent. Fire Country, being its foremost enemy, had suffered the most devastation out of everyone involved, its armies of skilled ninjas decimated before a force too great for anyone to have ever imagined. 10 years ago, Fire Country lost the Battle of Borderline and lost most its lands and people to the country of Sound. The horrible loss had forced survivors to retreat to Konoha, their last stronghold, their only measure of hope. Ever since then, Konoha could only send out limited number of soldiers to fight the unending battles on the bloody fields outside Konoha, just barely managing to keep the enemy from the gates. The losses were great. The number of able-bodied soldiers decreased every day the war raged, and so, the leader of Fire Country, the third Hokage as he was diademed, set forth a law that might have seemed heartless in gentler times. He decided that since there were not enough adults to fill the space of soldiers, so it must fall to the children. That is how the Special Academy was formed. That is how the children of Konoha began training as soldiers. That is how destiny was put into motion for a select group of children. In his heart, he knew that he could have done better. He knew that had he studied a little harder, maybe even trained a bit more, he could have passed with top scores in his class and gotten into the Special Academy as a star. It was just too bad that he was too damned lazy to care about any of that stuff. Nara Shikamaru, a 15-year-old boy of too little ambition and too many complaints, pondered about his acceptance into the Special Academy a bit more before slouching off to the main building where he was supposed to meet the rest of his battalion. From the looks of the graduating class, it seemed that only 9 or 10 of his classmates had actually passed the tests to get into the Special Academy, himself included, but he could care less about that. All he wanted to do was get to the building, find out who his roommate would be and get some sleep. He knew from the letter sent by the Academy office that he was a part of the 121st Battalion, and that his team would consist of 12 soldiers and 4 commanding officers. Besides that, no one had deemed it important enough to tell him, and he had not cared enough to inquire. Well, he thought as he passed through the front doors, I guess I'll find out all that soon enough. Haruno Sakura, the pink-haired vision of loveliness, sat only 3 chairs away from his devoted eyes, her smile enchanting and her green eyes sparkling. He had known that Sakura had aimed to get into the Special Academy and had tried his best so that he could go with her. Now, it seemed that all his sleepless nights and migraine headaches have paid off. After all, was he, Uzumaki Naruto, not sitting in the same room with his dream girl, in the Special Academy and in the same battalion at that? Somebody upstairs certainly must have loved him, because it was too wonderful to be true. He had loved her since he was too young to know the difference between boys and girls, and had followed her around ever since then despite the constant put-downs, turn-downs and God knows how many physical assaults from the pink goddess. During school, when they had been learning the various arts of the ninja, he had sought to impress her with his stylish moves, but she had never paid attention. But then again, that might not have been so bad, since he did mess up most of the times and had been laughed at more than admired. Actually, Naruto could not remember being admired at any point, but that was beside the point. Admired or not, messed up or not, here he was, in the Special Academy. That alone must show Sakura that he was not a loser, that his blonde, sunny hair did not mean his head was as empty as it stereotyped and that he did indeed have a chance to be in her presence without feeling her wrath. Naruto's intense scrutiny of his position in relation to Sakura blocked out all other things around him, such as the fact that other members of the battalion were trickling in one by one. Had he paid attention, he would have realized that most of them were from his graduating class, and that each and every one of them was giving him a look that was a cross between confusion and utter surprise. "Hey," whispered Shino as he sat down next to Shikamaru, "why is Naruto here?" Shikamaru picked his head up from the desk to stare indignantly at Shino who had bothered his near venture into sleep. Aburame Shino, he had not changed much since graduation, but who could tell with half his face covered by the raised collar of his coat and his eyes behind those creepy sunglasses? He must have passed. Or he's trespassing. I don't care. It was rather troublesome that Shino had brought up the question, however, since he had been wondering about that himself. How had Naruto come to be in the special academy when Shikamaru knew for a fact that the boy had failed practically every exam ever given in the school? Not to mention, Naruto had been terrible at all types of jutsus, an essential and mandatory skill for anyone to get into the special academy. In one incident, Naruto had somehow succeeded in blowing up a part of their classroom with his failed fire jutsu and had sent their teacher, Iruka, to the emergency room. Shikamaru narrowed his brown eyes as he stared at Naruto's back, as if staring hard enough could bring him the answer, but at that moment, yet another classmate from his class entered and broke his concentration by sitting himself directly in his line of sight to Naruto. Well, muttered Shikamaru, if it isn't the prince himself. Snorting to himself, Shikamaru buried his head into his arms on his desk, protecting his ears from what could be a very loud and piercing noise. Sasuke-kun. Everyone, with the exception of Shikamaru who had already taken preventive measures, cringed in pain, as a blur of long blonde hair streaked from one end of the classroom to the other in a pace so fast that it created a tailspin wind behind her. Aforementioned Sasuke sat impassive in his chair, not paying attention to the adoring mass of females standing a little too close to him. I knew we'd be in the same battalion, gushed Ino, her blue eyes wide and sparkling with joy. She would have continued on with the gushing, but soon she was ousted from Sasuke's side by Sakura, her best friend and worst enemy. My, aren't we a little forward, Ino? My, aren't we a little ugly, Sakura? The two raging females stared and growled at each other over Sasuke's dark mop of hair, their arms raised in fighting stances and their chakra levels spiking. Sasuke merely stood and moved to another chair, away from the two girls fighting over his non-attention like two squirrels over a nut. Throughout all this, Naruto could only frown in heartbreak. Sakura, his vision of perfection, was only paying attention to Sasuke again. She had never even deigned to give him the time of day, but when Sasuke showed up, she would cater to his every whim. That is, if Uchiha Sasuke even had a whim. Naruto wasn't so sure if Sasuke had whims or emotions. That aside, it ticked him off that Sasuke, who had the adoring attention of Sakura, did not even appreciate what he had. And what did Sakura, or any other female in existence, see in Sasuke anyway? Naruto turned his baby blue eyes to the Uchiha boy and shook his head. He could see nothing too different that set Sasuke so far apart from him. Sure, the guy might have been good-looking in that Iceman kind of way, what with his dark, almost bluish hair, complemented by his black eyes and pale skin. Yeah, Naruto thought, Sasuke might be a good-looking guy, even if he looked somewhat like a frozen corpse. Okay, sure, Sasuke might be better looking than him. And he was taller, but then again, who the hell wasn't? And he was smarter if their test scores told anything. And he was better at jutsu, be it ninjutsu, genjutsu or taijutsu, but hell, everyone was. And he was the last of the illustrious and powerful Uchiha clan. And he was rich. Naruto stopped before he could go on. This was depressing him. But damn it, they were on equal ground now, weren't they? They were both in the special academy, so what did it matter if Sasuke got in with the highest scores and he had barely squeaked by the skin of his teeth? Setting his chin at a confident angle, Naruto decided it was time to make sure Sakura knew that he was alive and on the same level as Sasuke. He looked at Sakura, still engaged in a stare battle with Ino, then at Sasuke who sat between him and the object of his affections, girded up his proverbial loins and stood. He would walk up to Sakura, show her that he was as good, if not better than Sasuke somehow, and make his mark. So intent was he on Sakura, so concentrated on her beautiful form as he was, Naruto failed to notice that there was an extraneous chair in his way. Therefore, he could only gasp in surprise when he tripped and plunged towards the floor face first. Lucky for him, his face did not meet the floor, but landed on something a bit softer, a little more yielding. He registered that whatever his face had smashed into was somewhat pleasant and warm, and he sighed in relief. At least he had not broken his nose, for that would not have impressed Sakura any. Then it actually registered in his brain just what that something his face was on. It was a lap. For a blissful moment, Naruto pictured it was Sakura's lap and felt a blush creep onto his face, but the next moment, he realized something. His left cheek was against something that just did not belong on a female's anatomy. Oh, shit, Naruto thought, just before he lifted his embarrassed and chagrined face towards the owner of the lap. A very pissed off, disbelieving Uchiha Sasuke. A brief thought of, why do these things happen to me, occurred to Naruto before Sasuke stood and shoved Naruto's shocked body off him. Only then did Naruto see that it wasn't only Sasuke who was looking at him with murder in his eyes, but Sakura and Ino had the same look in their eyes as well. Also, it seemed that everyone in their battalion had arrived and was staring at him with gaping jaws. There could have been a messy slaughter of one Uzumaki Naruto, there could have been a massive round of laughter from his classmates about his current situation. Hell, there even could have been singing choirs of angels welcoming him into the bosom of heaven, but none of it happened because thankfully, at that moment of shocked dead air, one of their commanding officers walked in and demanded attention. What is going on already? All heads whipped towards the voice, from Naruto who was nearly prone on the floor to Sakura who was in the middle of picking up a chair to bash his head in. There stood in the doorway, leaning rather casually against the door jamb, was a man with a cigarette dangling from his lips quirked into a smile. His dark eyes held amusement at the scene before him, and he did not quite know if he should scold the class for such a raucous behavior or compliment them for their liveliness. I hope all this energy won't disappear on the battlefield, he said as he walked casually into the midst of his shocked soldiers, and I suggest you all take a seat. Almost immediately, everyone took a seat at the nearest chair possible, and fortunately for Sakura, it was right next to Sasuke. Smiling smugly towards Ino who was a bit further off, Sakura tossed her hair right into Naruto's face just behind her. Before Naruto could lodge a complaint, before he could even acknowledge that his beloved had touched him albeit accidentally and painfully, the commanding officer took the situation into his hands. Welcome to the 121st Battalion. I'm one of your commanders, Sarutobi Asuma. With that, he looked around at the faces of his soldiers. There were 12 of them, and only 3 were not replacements. The 3, Hyuga Neji, Tenten and Rock Lee, were the only survivors of the 121st and had been with him for a year now. Only 4 weeks ago, the 121 was a fully manned 12-soldier team, but then, they had gone off to battle near the borderline. And only those 3 and the 4 commanding officers had made it back alive. It was depressing to Asuma that he had survived so many skirmishes and battles only to see the young soldiers in his command get killed and injured beyond repair. Most of them were between the ages of 13 and 16. If it wasn't for the war with the Sound, they should all be in school, worrying about tests and dating instead of stepping onto the slaughtering fields. Anyway, Asuma continued, clearing his head of sad thoughts, welcome, 9 rookies, and welcome back, Neji, Tenten, and Lee. He nodded towards the 3 that he knew and received a nod from each of them. They were 16, and according to record, only a year older than the 9 rookies. He wondered if they would all get along, if they would all get to be friends only to say goodbye when one of them died. He wondered if he could take this for much longer. Someone up there really fucking hates me, grumbled Naruto as he lugged his bag to his newly assigned dormitory room. Earlier, he had been ecstatic, convinced that his luck had finally turned for the better, being so damned near Sakura. Then, as they say, the shit had hit the fan, in the form of his face plant into Sasuke's lap. Then more shit had come flying straight at him, because after the lengthy explanation and orientation by Asuma, he had found himself assigned to the same damned room as Uchiha Sasuke. When he stepped into his new room, he found that the shit had not stopped flying just yet. He had somehow hoped that even if he was sharing a room with Sasuke, there would be enough space for him to set up camp and not ever interact with the boy. Unfortunately, such was not the case. There were 3 beds lined up against the far wall separated only by a small lamp table between them, and the rest of the space only amounted to a tiny section with a low rising table with barely enough room for a cushion. Basically, from the space available and the arrangement of furniture, it seemed that Naruto would have to spend his time in this room with Sasuke in his face. Yep, really hates me, damned bastards. Wait, 3 beds. Move, will you? I need to sleep. Naruto took a reflexive step into the room before turning his head. At the door stood Nara Shikamaru, his face twisted into his usual expression of annoyance, his brown hair twitching like a cat in a stir. What are you doing? I mean, Naruto stuttered, his brain unable to comprehend anything beyond the basic fact that Sasuke was his roommate. Are you here to switch with me? The last bit came out fast and with an upsurge of unbelievable hope, but Shikamaru rolled his eyes at Naruto's enthusiasm and merely stepped in. You idiot, Shikamaru sighed, I'm your roommate, too. Huh, Naruto owlishly stared at Shikamaru as he unpacked on top of his selected bed, then reread the paper that had assigned him to a Sasuke-filled hell. And lo and behold, right below Uchiha's name was. Well, it had to be better than sharing a room alone with that stuck-up ice prince, right? But, wait, why the hell was Shikamaru unpacking on one of the beds against the wall? Shikamaru, no, you have to take the middle. Eyes narrowed, Shikamaru ignored Naruto as he continued, but it was so hard, so very hard to ignore a hopping lump of blonde energy yelling at him in panic. If you don't take the middle, then I'm gonna have to sleep near Sasuke. That's not cool. In fact, that is just fucking wrong. Shut up, idiot, came a voice in Naruto world to see Sasuke, the one who was causing all this mental distress, standing casually in the middle of the room staring at him as if he was the disgusting one. I refuse to sleep here. I'm changing rooms. You really are an idiot, Sasuke spat, this is the military. You don't get room changes because you don't like your roommate. But, Naruto sputtered, I hate you. And you hate me. One of us is gonna end up dead before the night's over. Yeah, you, dead last. Fuck off, asshole. Both of you, shut up. I'm going to sleep. Sasuke and Naruto turned in unison only to realize that they had gotten too close to each other during their argument when their faces ran into each other with a painful crack. I'm going to kill you, Naruto grated as he staggered off to the middle bed holding his nose, which was most likely going to swell to the size of Sasuke's goddamned ego. Not if I kill you first, Sasuke growled as he walked to the bed furthest to the right, hoping against hope that he would not die from an aneurysm before he even saw battle. In the building across from the boys' dormitory where Sasuke and Naruto were currently cursing everything holy and unholy, there stood the girls' dormitory. It was not nearly as large as the boys', seeing how there were more boys in the special academy than girls, but it was a nicer building filled with delicate female nuances. At least, it would seem that way until anyone stepped anywhere near the room shared by Haruno Sakura and Yamanaka Ino. The two girls were currently in the middle of an argument to see who would get the bed by the window and who would be relegated to the shadowy wall. So far, they had argued about everything, from who got which desk, who got the first turn at the bathroom in the morning, and of course, who had the rights and the feminine wiles to date Uchiha Sasuke. Their voices escalated, their tempers frayed, and the sounds carried through the half-foot of concrete and steel into the room adjacent to theirs, right into the ears of Hyuga Hinata and Tenten. When they used some colorful words, Hinata blushed delicately, infusing her pale cheeks with pink color as her silver eyes looked off in a random direction, pretending not to hear. Occasionally, she twirled her short, dark hair in her finger, trying to find a way to not eavesdrop on Sakura and Ino, who just kept getting louder. Tenten, on the other hand, had no such reservations and listened to every word unashamedly, even laughing softly at some of the more creative insults the girls threw around. It was good entertainment before going off to bed, really. She giggled some more as she unbound her brown hair from their restraints and ran a brush through it. Hinata, right, she said, tilting her head towards her new roommate. Don't be so shy, they're the ones screaming. It's just that, Hinata stuttered as she twiddled her fingers together, well, we shouldn't. Good gracious, she wouldn't be so bad if she could finish a sentence. Thought Tenten as she put her brush down and lathered some lotion on her arms. Her roommate before Hinata, Masaki had been her name, had been a boisterous girl filled with words. She had grieved when Masaki died 4 weeks ago, and even now, there was a space in her heart that seemed empty. She wanted Hinata to be like Masaki, damn it, if only to fool her into thinking that someone who had become her friend had not died before her eyes. Anyway, Tenten said gently, almost sadly, it sounds like they're having fun. That can't be so bad, you know. Not knowing what to say, Hinata remained quiet, but carefully eyed her roommate from the corner of her eyes, wishing that she could do something, say something to erase that haunted look that filled her brown eyes. Asuma lit his cigarette, taking a deep drag as he considered the other 3 officers before him. The 4 of them had shared the command of the 121 for 2 years now, but till now, they had never dealt with a group almost entirely comprised of rookies. It worried Asuma that the children, despite being accepted into the academy, were not ready. Hell, not even the 3 who had been with them a year were barely ready for battle, and they had seen more action than they should have. Don't think so hard. Asuma smiled at the gentle admonishment from his longtime friend and fellow officer Yuhi Kurenai. She was certainly a war-hardened veteran, her clear ruby eyes never confused or anxious even in tough situations. Right now, she was sipping tea that tasted like sewage water that she insisted was good for her health, her pretty face crunching into disgust with every taste. So, what do you think of our new soldiers? Promising, aren't they? Kurenai sighed and turned to face guy who had posed the enthusiastic question. That man was always so damned enthusiastic, whether it was about battle or about the lunch menu. When she had first met him 2 years ago to command the 121, she had been put off by his attitude and his bowl-cut hair, but now, it was all very endearing, if not comforting. As long as Guy could be so enthused about everything, the world would not fall off its axis. I would say so, yes, replied Kurenai, but I'm rather worried about, well, you know. You shouldn't, he's just fine. Kakashi, do you ever worry about anything? Kurenai huffed, her exasperation showing rather clearly. Not if I can help it. Kakashi replied, his only visible eye twinkling in nonchalant humor. Asuma chuckled at Kurenai's sour expression and Guy nodded sagely, knowing that this was an old argument. Kakashi just sat and continued reading his book of illicitness, occasionally rubbing his hand against the mask that covered half his face. So, you think it's okay having the demon bound in our Kurenai, Kakashi said, his voice mild but somehow dangerous, he has a name. I believe it's Uzumaki Naruto. Silence stretched thickly as each pondered the complication in the form of Uzumaki Naruto. None of them knew whether or not he would be a great asset or a great liability, but they would not, could not, sign him out of the war effort. As the third Hokage had told them, Naruto could be the key to victory. The only noise in the room came from Akamichi Choji as he worked his way through the third bag of potato chips for the morning. The constant crunching only served to grate on Shikamaru's nerves and made the headache already nagging at the back of his head come crawling to the forefront. Trying not to resent Choji, he was a childhood friend of sorts, for his eating habits, Shikamaru turned his malicious glance from the chubby boy's rosy-cheeked face to the real culprits who had caused him to have this incredibly bad mood. However, Shikamaru's deadly glare bounced right off of Naruto and Sasuke, who were busy ignoring each other to the point where all they could think about was each other and how much they would like to end the other's miserable existence. Their first night had been an unmitigated disaster, with Naruto and Sasuke refusing to go to sleep first. They had basically stayed up all night, yelling insults at each other, and completely ruining Shikamaru's chance of getting any sleep. If things kept up at this pace, Shikamaru might get off his lazy ass and kill the two of them in a messy and bloody way. It wasn't only Shikamaru who was annoyed by Naruto and Sasuke's behavior, since their nighttime insult yelling had also disturbed the sleep of Neji and Lee, who had the unfortunate luck to have the room next to theirs. Even though Neji had trained since an early age to ignore all distractions and fall into a peaceful meditative state when required, he had not been able to achieve his nirvana the night before. Of course, it had not helped that Lee had stayed up, listening and rooting for Naruto the whole way. Therefore, the general atmosphere rocked precariously between annoyance and homicidal rage, and the commanding officers took note of it as soon as they entered. Well, three of them, anyway. Kakashi, as per usual, was nowhere to be seen. Let me guess and say no one got a good night's sleep. Kurenai's amused voice pierced through the tense mood in the room and dispersed much of the ill will to the thin air. However, Naruto and Sasuke, who were still in the middle of their heated disagreement, paid her no mind and continued to ignore each other overtly. I'm Yuhi Kurenai, she began pleasantly, and I'm going to make sure you all survive out there. That was a promise this time, not a damned hope. She did not want to lose any more children in this war, especially those that she could protect. These 12 were her soldiers, her charges. They would survive the war intact, even if she had to lay down her life in exchange. And I'm made a guy, so bellowed a muscular man in a leotard that should have only been worn by those who aerobicize, and I will be here for you, if you want to talk, to spar, or to cry in my bosom. That caused most of the people in the room to shudder in revulsion, except for Lee, who was enthusiastically clapping and cheering him on as fires of joy burned in his eyes. Technically, there is a fourth commander, Asuma said when Guy finished posing, but as you rookies will learn, the man is never on time for anything. And so, introductions formally finished, the second day at the Special Academy was spent reviewing the concepts that they had learned in school. The first-year veterans Neji, Tenten and Lee listened as well, but it was clear that only Lee was paying any attention. Of the 9 rookies, it seemed that everyone was rather enraptured by the lecturing and the explaining, except for Naruto, who had begun fidgeting almost immediately, and Shikamaru, who had finally the chance to get some sleep. They relearned about the basics of all the jutsus, from the ninja arts of ninjutsu, the illusionary art of genjutsu, and the physical art of taijutsu. They were told again about the war and its origins, the tactics previously employed by the Sound and its still yet unknown leader, and about the Battle of Borderline that had decided everything. Asuma droned on, punctuated only by Guy and Kurenai's occasional interruptions, about mission assignments and the defense perimeters. Sakura paid attention, despite the fact that she knew everything that was being reviewed. After all, she had been a great student and would be a good soldier. Obviously, she knew that there were 5 lines of defense, the 5th line being closest to Konoha and being the safest post, and the 1st line being nearest to the borderline and quite dangerous. She also knew that their two lines of offense were the most dangerous assignments, the death rate in the 80% range on average, and only the most elite and well-trained battalions went there. The pink-haired girl smiled as the information she already knew was displayed before her capable mind. Wouldn't Sasuke just be so impressed by her intelligence, and wouldn't Ino just burn with green envy? As the officers finished up, a poof in the front of the classroom announced the belated arrival of their final commanding officer. "Hey, I'm sorry I'm late, but he began, running his right hand through his spiky and unruly silver hair. "You see, I ran into some rabid monkeys, and monkeys don't live near Konoha. Ah, my mistake, Asuma." Naruto glanced at the new commanding officer and could only conclude that the silver-haired one could not be that reliable. Not only was he late by 3 hours, a feat that not even Shikamaru could claim, this guy also was a terrible liar. The last of the Uchiha clan came to a similar conclusion, only adding that this new commander might be a bigger idiot than his blonde roommate. "Oh, yes, I'm Hatake Kakashi. That's all." "Yep," Sasuke grimaced, this Kakashi was most definitely on par with Naruto. "Just great. I'm telling you, this room isn't big enough for 4 people. It's barely enough for 3. So, I just want to stay here until damn Choji goes to sleep." Shikamaru gave up trying to reason with Kiba. What was the point, anyway, since it seemed as if no one bothered to listen to him, most notably, his constantly at war roommates. "See," Kiba continued, his dark eyes unblinking and serious, "Choji isn't a bad guy, but I think he wants to eat Akamaru. He's got that gleam, you know." Akamaru, Kiba's faithful companion dog, barked in assent as he burrowed further into Kiba's jacket. The dog and his master had not slept much the night before either, for they had been on Choji lookout, in order to prevent Akamaru's sudden change in status from dog to stew. "Kiba, even Choji wouldn't eat a dog," Shikamaru mumbled as he sat on his bed. "Besides, you don't want to be here when Naruto and Sasuke get here." "Man, are they as bad as I think they are? I'm surprised Sasuke hasn't murdered Naruto yet for that lap thing." Shikamaru snorted and lied back on his bed, trying to get comfortable and as close to sleep as possible before the two of them returned. However, Kiba kept on talking, which put a major hindrance in his plans to sleep. "I still can't see how Naruto made it. Sasuke, sure, he's the damned super genius ninja of the Uchiha clan, all fated to be, but Naruto." Replied Shikamaru, still trying to find peace in sleep. "Naruto can't even do a simple transformation, or even create a clone. All he can do is run off at his mouth." "Right," mumbled Shikamaru, feeling awfully put out that Kiba would not take the hint and just get out. "And Naruto just antagonizes Sasuke without even trying. How the hell did those two ever get assigned together? Don't care. I'd hate to be in their way when they really start fighting, because Naruto would just get killed." Kiba continued, oblivious to Shikamaru's deep-seated wish to be left alone. "I wish," he murmured to Kiba's statement, picturing just how quickly Sasuke could flay the blonde's flesh off with a simple ninjutsu. "Maybe you're right," Kiba said as he made motions to stand, "and I'd better get gone before those two get back." However, the sentiment came too late, for the dueling pair burst open the door at that exact moment, both of them holding their toothbrushes like kunais. After a brief struggle at the doorway that could not accommodate both of them at once, they barreled right over Kiba, who happened to be sitting in the only pathway available to the beds. "Oh, here we go again," thought Shikamaru as he sighed once more. At least it looked like Kiba and Akamaru would get some rest tonight, seeing as how Naruto and Sasuke's rampage into the room had completely knocked the dog boy senseless. Besides, neither the blonde nor the Uchiha had noticed that they had run someone over, so busy they were with their rivalry. Sighing again more out of habit than actual frustration, Shikamaru buried his head into the pillow and wished that he could knock himself out as well. Perhaps the new soldiers of the 121 did not quite know that wars meant death and misery, or maybe they were still enamored by the romantic quality of a battle that they read about in books. Whatever the case, of the 9 rookies, most of them were itching for action, some to prove that they were strong, some to relieve boredom, and some to experience what they had trained so hard for. However, the commanding officers were somewhat relieved that for the first 3 weeks with the newly formed 121, no new mission orders had come through. Sure, they were somewhat dismayed that they were safe in Konoha while their fellow officers and soldiers were off dying on the blood-soaked fields just beyond the massive walls, but they could not help but feel lucky that they had not been forced to send these 15 and 16-year-olds to kill and be killed. They would appreciate it as long as it could last, because when the first battle came, it would change them all. Hadn't Neji, Tenten and Lee already learned that harsh lesson? The 3 weeks were not wasted, every spare moment devoted to strengthening their soldiers' abilities and mental stamina. The 4 of them had divided the group of 12 into threes according to their skills and school scores, and had trained them to an inch of their life. Kakashi, ever the nonchalant one, had chosen to train the group consisting of Sasuke, Naruto and Sakura. He knew that Sasuke and Naruto absolutely despised each other and considered the other a rival of sorts. The reason that he requested those two on the same team had been so that their rivalry would spring them beyond what each could achieve alone, and it had paid off in spades. Those two developed astronomically, Sasuke learning jutsus that only the higher-ups could use and Naruto becoming unbelievably strong. Sakura, the poor girl, had not the strength of chakra to keep up with either of them, but she was a bright one. Kakashi enjoyed furthering her knowledge on genjutsu and medical arts, knowing that she would never forget what had been told her once. He knew that if anything amazing was to happen, it would come from the 3 he had trained so mercilessly. It had to, didn't it? What with the last of the Uchiha with his yet undiscovered Sharingan eyes and the demon bound with powers to match the gods under his tutelage. It irked him that in the 3 weeks he had trained them that neither the Sharingan nor the power of the demon had emerged, but he was a patient man. He was sure that if he trained them more, their innate talents would surface and their chances of survival would increase. Hell, if those two could manage to master their latent powers, it was entirely possible that the war could finally end. Or at least, the 3rd Hokage thought that about Naruto. But Kakashi was willing to bet that if similar hopes were placed on Sasuke, he would not disappoint. But all his hopes of training them until they discovered their powers went down the drain when at the end of the 3 weeks, mission orders came down. Battalion 121 would go off to the 5th line of defense and support the teams already there for the month ahead. A month on the battlefield. A month in which the entire battalion could once again be wiped out, for so much promised to be blown out like a wispy candle light in a hurricane. Dash. The wind ruffled his already messy hair and swept over him in a cleansing brush. The 121 had finally received orders, and though it was to the 5th line, probably the safest place on the war front, it was still something other than sitting in the safety of Konoha training. It was what they had trained for, wasn't it, to go out into war and hopefully put a big enough dent in Sound's forces for at least a ceasefire. Besides, Naruto felt stronger than ever. When he had first stepped into the special academy, he had promised himself that he would be stronger, better than what he had been. He would improve in every way possible, and he had been successful beyond his expectations. Granted, the damned genius of all things jutsu Sasuke had overshadowed him with his quick learning and easy mastery over things that even the higher-level ninjas could not handle, but he had his own strengths. He was stronger, for one, and had what Kakashi had called an idiotic amount of chakra and physical stamina. Then there was Kakashi, the one both he and Sasuke had written off as a total loser. Not only did they change their minds about him being a loser and a weakling minutes after their training began, but they both genuinely respected the man's intelligence and strength. He was a monster, really, his chakra level so much higher than anyone else they'd ever met, and his mastery over jutsus was something of a miracle. Sakura had told them, or Sasuke while Naruto eavesdropped, that Kakashi was the master of over 1,000 jutsus according to records she had researched. Certainly, their silver-haired, masked commander was a man to be reckoned with. Even if his hobby was reading a book too dirty for him to even show them a sentence out of it. Kakashi had made him stronger, that was for sure. Though it had ticked off the blonde that Kakashi seemed more interested in Sasuke than him, he still could not argue that the one-eyed pervert genius had helped him improve far beyond his original expectations. At least, he could be thankful for that, for in 3 weeks, Kakashi had made him and Sasuke better ninjas than all those years in school had. So here he was, stronger and better, before going off to war, standing on the highest point in Konoha looking down at the city that was his home. 10 years ago, when everyone had evacuated to Konoha, Naruto had been so afraid that he would have been left behind. After all, he was an orphan, no one to call family, and ever since he could remember, he had been fending for his own. Then he had been picked up into the gentle arms of the 3rd Hokage, who had personally carried him back to Konoha and made sure that he survived. The blonde knew that no one liked him, even now. He knew that almost every adult he looked at viewed him as something less than human, but he never let it get to him. What other people felt about him, he could not really help. All he could do was make sure they paid attention to him, so that he would not be left behind, so that he would not be forgotten. So what if everyone in Konoha, with the possible exception of the Hokage old man and Iruka, hated him down to the core? At least they wouldn't be forgetting any time soon. Therefore, even if everyone hated him, Naruto did not mind going off to war. In fact, he relished in this chance given to him, so that he may prove himself to the people of Konoha that he was not so worthless. He could do things well, damn it, and he would damn well show them. 11 hours till deployment, huh? What to do? Naruto sat, his chin perched on his hands, as he looked around Konoha from the top of the monuments. No one was supposed to be up here, of course, this place was off limits to just about everyone, but he had wanted a panoramic view of his home before he went outside the walls. And the only place he could do it was on top of the monument of the 4 Hokages carved in massive relief into the rock face that served as the town's rear wall. If someone scolded him, so what? He'd be long gone before they could finish lecturing, fighting off a horde of war-crazed sound ninjas with his awesome powers. His blue eyes glazed as he pictured himself in the throes of heroics. It featured him as the main character, the badass ninja, and it involved the thrashing of several hundreds, maybe even thousands of sound ninjas, his unfortunate opponents, or rather, victims. And, as icing on the cake, one Uchiha Sasuke took the title role as the helpless injured comrade that he would rescue. Ah yes, it was beautiful in his little world until it was rudely interrupted by a snort. So this is where you ran off to? Shit, of course with his luck, it had to be Sasuke standing there with that goddamned superior smirk on his face. Hadn't they already annoyed each other enough during the last 3 weeks as they competed against each other in order to be better? Hadn't Naruto spent many nights unable to sleep in anticipation of some surprise attack from his dark-haired rival? Hadn't Sasuke already called him every word synonymous with idiot currently available in the lexicon? In 3 weeks, he had seen more of Sasuke than anyone else, training with him by day and sleeping in the same room at night. They wrangled at each other, insulted, and yelled, or at least, Naruto yelled while Sasuke spat out various sarcastic remarks. Kakashi had told them if it weren't for the spitting animosity shooting out of their eyes every time they happened to be near each other, they would be mistaken for a married couple and that had earned Kakashi an attempt on his life from 2 irate boys. It would seem, then, logically anyway, the day before battle, a day that their commanding officers had given them as a free day to do as they wished, Sasuke would not find Naruto and bother the shit out him, on his to-do list. But no, Sasuke was there, still smirking at him. Naruto's left eye began ticking rather ominously, but the dark-haired ninja paid it no heed. After all, if he was intimidated by a bit of brow ticking, he had no business going off to war, now did he? How did you find me? Naruto asked, his irritation clear in his posture and his tone. The irritation climbed another notch when Sasuke's smirk only got bigger and the hated rival dared to sit down next to him. Chakra locating, Sasuke replied smugly, which is easy when your target is too incompetent to smother his signature. Shut up, asshole, I'm not incompetent, I'm just not doing it because we're in Konoha. How Sasuke could convey a world of contempt through a snort was a mystery to Naruto, but damn it, he could do it. Don't let your guard down, ever, you idiot. You're going to end up dead the minute we get to battle with your attitude. Naruto narrowed his eyes suspiciously at the boy sitting next to him. If it had not been Sasuke saying it, it might have sounded almost like concern. Don't piss me off, okay? Naruto said, turning his eyes back on the view of Konoha below him. Why not? It's so damned easy. Because, the blonde replied, his voice uncharacteristically gentle, I want to see Konoha peacefully, in case. Just in case. For the first time in their acquaintance, Naruto had spoken to him without the taint of malice or anger in his voice, and that threw Sasuke for a loop. He had figured when he set out to find Naruto that he would get a good stress relief by arguing with his loud-mouthed roommate, but apparently, that was not to be. Instead, he was faced with a quiet boy who was thinking serious thoughts. Don't say that, Sasuke answered just as gently, because we'll come back. The only one who can kill you is me. I reserve that right as the one that you piss off the most. Yeah, I guess, I'd feel cheated if anyone other than me killed you, asshole. So, the two sat on top of the monument of the 4 greatest ninjas of Fire Country, looking out into the sunset coloring the landscape orange, and found some companionable silence and understanding. 5 in the morning, an hour usually designated for sleep or illegal activities, was the time that Battalion 121 gathered in the hall of the Special Academy, every single one of them awake and armed. As per instructions, they were all in the assigned dark-colored uniform, their pouches, filled with shuriken and kunai, strapped to their legs and back, and their forehead protectors with the symbol of Konoha tied to various places on their bodies. Asuma gave a quick prayer to whichever god that still cared to bring them all back at the end of the month, none too worse for wear, and Kurenai smiled encouragingly at her flock of young soldiers. They left the inspirational speech to Guy, who was going at it full swing, his loud and strident voice echoing off the walls of the hall. Of course, Kakashi was nowhere to be seen, but he would be along. Even if he was a chronic retard about punctuality, he was one of the best in the ninja army of Konoha. He would never miss a battle, especially not with so many children being rookies. Naruto felt his hands shake in anticipation as he checked and rechecked all of his equipment. Although he felt vaguely uncomfortable in the newly issued uniform of entirely too many dark colors, he figured it had to be better than his usual orange jumpsuit. Kakashi was right, if he went to battle in glaring orange, he might as well as paint a bullseye on his ass and ask for sound ninjas to use him for target practice. He looked around him and saw that all his battalion mates were in similar condition as he, somewhere between anticipation and crippling fear. Well, except for the 3 veterans of their group. They seemed to be more composed, but they had already seen action, already been through all this. Still, Lee was fired up, his eyes twin dark pools of fighting spirit underneath those impossibly thick eyebrows, while Neji was more reserved, only clenching his fist to show that he was ready. Ten seemed withdrawn, but Naruto hardly knew her, so he could not judge whether or not she was ready for battle. Then there was Sasuke, of course, the Ice Prince himself, not even showing that he was excited or scared or anything. His rival stood next to him, composed as ever, his dark eyes empty of emotions that he knew was burning a hole through his baby blues. What was up with that? We're all here, Naruto heard Guy say, to fight for Konoha and our future. Be brave, be stupendous, and be alive. With that, Battalion 121 filed out of the hall to march onto the battlefield. Discovery of something more, explosions, random sprays of arterial blood, wayward flying body parts and screams of the horribly injured. Those were things that Naruto had expected to see when he arrived with his battalion at the 5th line of defense, northwest sector at point 27. Yet, what he did see was a bunch of ninjas sitting around a clearing in the forest playing 5-card draw with their shuriken as chips. Kakashi, Naruto frowned up at his commander, are we at the right place? What might have been an affirmative grunt escaped through Kakashi's face mask as he wandered into the clearing, his hands at his side as if he was taking a stroll in the park. He greeted some of the card players with slaps to their shoulders and a few words, and soon, the other commanding officers joined in on the greeting ceremony that was both foreign and disturbing to the highly strung-out members of the 121. Say, Lee, Shikamaru spoke, his voice a study of puzzlement, is this how it's supposed to be? It's hard to say, every reception is different. The last time we were sent out, it was to the 3rd line and the ninjas were playing tag. This sent a quiet wave of murmurs through the 121 as each ninja wondered if those in battle were all quirky and mystifyingly odd or if it was just the ones they had encountered. Who in their right minds played games in the battlefield? They're sentries, came the calm voice of Neji as he looked over at the group still engrossed in greeting and cards. They alert us if the enemy broke through the previous lines. The ninjas you don't see are the real important ones. You can say, the ones you see goofing off. They're the bait. That put things in perspective and an of understanding swept through the group. Now, the card game didn't seem so stupid or misplaced, but necessary and more dangerous than the actual fighting. They were there in the open, leaving themselves vulnerable to attack so that those not visible could have a better chance of annihilating the incoming enemy forces. It was a hard gamble, a harsh tactic. It was more frightening than flying body parts. Welcome to the war, children, Kakashi whispered softly. Sasuke sat quietly on his assigned tree branch, hidden deeply in the foliage and the moonless night. His duty tonight was as the second shift watch and he would be damned pissed if anyone got through his perimeter. He had already set up various alarm signals and his body was a tightly prepared machine, ready to spring into action at any time. In fact, he welcomed some form of infiltration effort, because he was definitely tired of waiting. Despite his cool facade and uncaring demeanor, he was looking forward to engaging the enemy. Only then could he see how much stronger he had truly gotten. Only then could he see if he measured up to the murdering, traitorous bastard, the one he had once called brother. A very small disturbance in the wind had him alert and in position before the unfortunate soul who had crossed his perimeter could even blink. Sasuke quickly jumped behind the intruder and grabbed him by his throat with his left hand while his right one placed the pointy end of the kunai to the jumping pulse at his jugular. There had been no noise and very little waste of motion. All in all, an efficient and effective collaring of an enemy agent. Can't breathe, or an efficient and effective collaring of a complete idiot. Naruto. Sasuke ground out through his gritted teeth, keeping his voice down to a whisper but still conveying a world of anger. Why are you here? Peeing. Duh. Let me go. Oh, yes, he still had the dead last idiot boy in a death hold, didn't he? Loosening his grip but not letting go altogether, Sasuke once again asked in a very low voice, "Why are you here, peeing?" "This is the perimeter." "You see," the blonde one answered just as softly, "my watch is in an hour, I couldn't sleep, thought I'd pee and take over since I'm on right after you." Strangling back the string of swear words threatening to burst from his lips, Sasuke let go of Naruto completely and stepped back, holstering his kunai back into its rightful place. Only the overly zealous idiot Naruto would venture out into the perimeter in complete darkness in the middle of a battlefield to go relieve himself. "Go back," Sasuke whispered, "I don't need to be replaced before my shift is up." "No way, nah, no thanks. I'm staying. I'm too damned wired to go back to sleep." Maybe it was the obstinate tone or the way Naruto stood with his arms crossed and his back to the dark-haired soldier. Whatever the reason, Sasuke knew that Naruto would not go back without a fight, and that meant a whole load of noises that a secretly placed watch could not afford. Damned stubborn fool, thought Sasuke before he jumped back onto his perch on the tree, opting to ignore Naruto. He said nothing as his blonde roommate jumped up next to him and crouched. He knew if there had been enough light to see by, he would see the perpetually annoying blonde with that grin of, "I won, heh," on his face. If he was not such a restrained and well-reserved man, Sasuke would have stuck his tongue out at his rival. So they crouched on the same branch, keeping watch until the sun started to rise on the eastern horizon. Sasuke had refused to go back to camp once his shift was up since Naruto had so rudely barged in on him, and he'd be damned if he gave the blonde boy the satisfaction of seeing him retreat into the relative safety of the camp. He'd stick it out and show that good-for-nothing that he was entirely much better than him. Yet, all thoughts of rivalry and irritation left him as he watched the rose and oranges bleed into the cobalt blue of the retreating night sky. Then all he could think was that the sunrise was beautiful. He had not seen it rise over anything other than the thick walls of Konoha in a very long time, so to see it peek over the trees was something to behold. The colors were spectacular, and for a moment, Sasuke forgot that he was in the line of fire, keeping watch with the idiot rival by his side. "Hey, Naruto," Sasuke said finally, "your shift and mine are over. We should get back." When he got no response, he turned his dark eyes to the crouched form of the blonde. What he saw was the morning sun glinting off his golden hair, giving him an unearthly glow around his head that resembled a halo. It blinded him for a moment, this dance of light among the strands of Naruto's hair, and he nearly reached forward to touch, to see if it could possibly be as warm as it looked. Thankfully, he came to his senses before he could commit that act of stupidity and realized that Naruto was sound asleep. How the hell can he sleep crouched on a tree limb? That's some balance. It surprised Sasuke that he felt no resentment towards Naruto for being asleep during his designated watch. He felt no anger that the blonde had failed in his first given duty in the battlefield, he felt no need to wake him up and make fun of him for the rest of the day. Instead, he just wanted to watch the peaceful scene for a while longer, like the way the morning light played in Naruto's hair and how he slept on blissfully with a smile on his face. The sun crept a little higher in the sky, the glowing hues of sunrise overtaken by the glaring rays of day, but Sasuke did not see the transition. He kept watching Naruto as he slept, not noticing that his face had softened into a smile. Sasuke watched until Naruto blearily opened his eyes, revealing the sleep-laden blue orbs to the world. When those eyes focused, Sasuke smirked and tipped Naruto on the shoulder lightly as a good morning of sorts. He had meant it as a friendly thing, really he had, but Naruto must have been still half asleep and Sasuke stronger than he thought, because that gentle tap was all it took for Naruto to fall out of the tree to land in an undignified heap on the forest floor. In surprise, Sasuke stared at the form face down at the base of the tree cursing his name to the high heavens. Then the last of the Uchiha did something he had not done in a very long time, he laughed. Something suspicious was going on, she knew it. She could smell it in the air as soon as Naruto barged into the campsite covered in dirt and twigs, muttering under his breath about treacherous assholes. Her suspicion only heightened when shortly thereafter, Sasuke, her prince, her dream boy, came into the camp via the same way Naruto had, chuckling behind his raised hand. Since when did Sasuke chuckle? And why was it that he was doing it now? Sakura trained her green eyes on the chortling Uchiha heir as he made his way across the campsite, using the full power of her intellect to see if something indeed was going on. It had to be, of course, why else was her woman's intuition going crazy? She did recall that when she had returned from her watch, she had not seen Sasuke or Naruto in the camp. Not seeing Naruto had not been a big surprise since he had been assigned to watch duty after her shift, but Sasuke, he had the same one as her. She had planned during her watch to corner Sasuke as he returned from his watch and charm him with her intelligence and poise. But alas, she had not found him last night and had fallen asleep rather disappointed. Then in the morning, the first thing she saw had to be Naruto thundering across the camp like a herd of cattle followed by her crush. Had they spent the night together? That thought brought a barrage of images that she most certainly did not appreciate parading through her head, and she cut off that disturbing train of thought quickly. Of course they had not been anywhere near each other, they absolutely despised each other. How many times had she heard Naruto complain about Sasuke during their 3-week marathon training? How many times had she seen Sasuke call the blonde an idiot or derivation thereof? There was no way those two could spend time together without getting into some sort of a fight. Therefore, as logic dictated, if they had spent time last night within a mile of each other, the whole camp would have woken up from Naruto's screaming antics. Yes, no doubt about that. Still, something was damned suspicious. So, not much action around here for the past few weeks. For that, Kurenai was glad. Her worries about sending her soldiers into death lessened as she heard the report from the commander of Battalion 448 who had been here for the last 3 months. As far as she could gather from his precise account of what has been happening for the past few months, there had not been any attacks worth a mention for a while now. It seemed that the enemies were all stopped well before they reached even the third line of defense, and for that, she was grateful. We're slowly gaining ground, not enough to notice at first, but we are. Asuma readily agreed with 448's commander. Not a month ago, hadn't he lost most of 121 at the third line? But it seemed now, very few even breached the second line. It was fortunate that the tides of war so long against them seemed to be turning in their favor. They may have more ninjas, proclaimed Guy, but we have better quality ones. Asuma smiled and agreed silently. When he had trained his rookie soldiers, he had not been expecting too much out of them. However, they had surprised him in those 3 weeks, most especially Shikamaru. From his scores and attitude, Asuma had assumed that Shikamaru was a lazy boy who had no special talents. Sure, his father was one of the top commanders at the first line and was a master shadow manipulator, but Asuma had only seen that Shikamaru had inherited the lazy gene from his illustrious father. That was quickly amended when Asuma had found out that Shikamaru, despite being lazy and a top-notch complainer, was a freaking genius. It wasn't that Shikamaru knew how to do all the jutsus or even cared to learn most of them, but the boy had a brain on him. He was a strategist, a masterful tactician, the kind which came along only every 100 years or so. One of these days, Shikamaru would become a great general and leader, planning victories in his head well before the battle. Yes, indeed, they had some quality ninjas. It wasn't only Shikamaru that impressed, however. From the way Kurenai had been talking, Hinata had as much potential as her cousin, Neji. They both possessed the Byakugan, and although Neji had more talent in utilizing that special ability, Hinata knew how to manipulate it well enough so that it worked in her favor. Kurenai's only complaint about her was that she had very low self-confidence that prevented her from improving faster, but knowing her, she would do something about Hinata's problem. Then there was the super rookie soldier, Uchiha Sasuke, and the demon-bound, Uzumaki Naruto. Kakashi had told him that even though neither had discovered their true powers, they were both incredibly talented and strong in their own way. Asuma had listened in disbelief, of course, since Naruto had never shown any promise to be a capable ninja. Sasuke, okay, he definitely could see how the last of the Uchiha would improve so drastically in such a short period of time, but Naruto. If he had not been the demon-bound, he would not have made it into the special academy. But Kakashi assured him that Naruto was not only capable, but very resilient and resourceful. The one visible eye had been utterly serious about Naruto's capabilities, and it had somewhat shocked Asuma when Kakashi told him that even without Naruto tapping into the power of the demon within him, he could still serve as the key to victory as the third Hokage wished. If he could only believe that, maybe there was no need to rely on the demon-bound or any of the children. After all, the enemy seemed to be retreating a bit further each day, hardly denting the wall of their second line. The war might end before the children saw any action at this rate, a prospect that lifted Asuma's burdened heart, and then there would be no need to discuss whose powers were greater, who was a linchpin to victory and who should be sacrificed. Yet, fate would not be so kind or so understanding. Despite Asuma's fervent wish that the war be over, despite Kurenai's wish that the children be spared the blood and the gore, even despite all the reports that said that the Sound's attacks were lessening and weakening, war would descend on Battalion 121 like vultures to a corpse. It is a known fact in the universe that when there is a surprise attack, it is supposed to happen at night when people are supposedly off guard and there is a cover of shadows. However, the sound infiltration unit felt no need to abide by such well-established rules of warfare and attacked the fifth line of defense full out on the third day after the 121 arrived. Naruto was just taking a small break between the two birch trees that stood at the edge of the camp when a loud explosion rocked the earth and sent him pitching sideways into a protruding knob of root on the ground. For an instant, Naruto saw stars dancing before his eyes, then there was too much going on for him to pay attention to the blood seeping from his temple. Pandemonium followed that earth-shaking boom and the entire camp, the ones that were playing cards, the ones taking a short nap, every single one of them, jumped into the air to engage the enemy that seemed to seep out of the forest like slime through a sieve. Shuriken flew through the air in silvery arcs, some hitting soft tissue and some getting deflected by the quick hands of the Konoha ninjas. Fire flamed from various directions, some in straight lines towards an enemy, some forming into animal shapes before running after a group of infiltrators. Then there were the sounds from hand-to-hand combat, from kunai scraping against bone, from hands ripping off flesh and from fingers displacing internal organs with jutsus. Naruto had never seen anything like it, and even though he was only immobile for 2 to 3 seconds after the initial explosion, as he watched the blurring scenes of combat around him, bodies started falling from the treetops. The first crunch of a body not a foot away from him startled Naruto into action, making his rubbery legs gather and forcing them to run towards an enemy. But the enemies were so fast, he could barely see one as they flitted by him. His eyes could not keep up, not with these ninjas that had to be on an entirely different level than he. Shit, shit, shit. What the hell is going on? Panic nipped at Naruto's mind, sinking its sharp teeth into the tenuous grip on sanity he had. He could hardly see the enemies, the only comrades he saw were on the ground dead or gasping out their last. The forest was on fire, burning and choking his lungs, blinding his already blurry eyes, and he couldn't find his way to safety, to an enemy, to anything. Not knowing where he was going, not knowing when he might have to stand and fight, Naruto ran along the forest, afraid to call out the names of his fellow soldiers in the battalion. Where were they? Any of them? They couldn't have already died, could they? And why were there so many enemies at the fifth line? By the time the sound could get this far, their numbers should have dwindled to a manageable level by the first 4 lines, and even if they weren't, they should have heard something way before such a massive force got to them. So many thoughts jumbled through his mind, running circles around his overloaded brain, and he forgot to pay attention to the things around him. Perhaps that was why he stumbled over a rock and fell forward as a kunai whizzed through the air where his head been only a moment before to sink into the tree just in front of his face. Not good, Naruto thought as he pivoted on his hands to face whatever was behind him. He was ready, wasn't he, to deal with anything the sound had to throw at him. He had trained very hard and become pretty damned good at fighting. He could take down a few sound ninjas by himself, if he could only remember what it was that he had learned during his training. What he saw before him wasn't just a few sound ninjas. Before his panicked blue eyes stood at least 10 or so of the enemy, all of them wearing the symbol of the sound on their uniforms, their eyes glinting with murderous malice. One of them stepped forward and kicked him in the face before he could even process all the information, sending his body to slam into a tree, knocking the air out of him. Well, a kid, is it? I knew Konoha was doing badly, but this is priceless. Gasping, Naruto stood on his unsteady legs, clutching his stomach as he tried to get breath back into his lungs. The one who had spoken, his eyes the only thing visible above his scarf, was looking at him with a raised eyebrow, twirling a kunai in his hand. Yes, there were 10 of them. 10, a number that exceeded his expectations, a number he should not hope to defeat by himself. Damn, I'm pretty much fucked. Letting out a laugh at his situation, Naruto got into the fighting stance that Kakashi had taught him. Somehow, the terrifying panic that had encased his mind faded away at the sight of enemies before him. His heart no longer beat like a trapped bird and his breath no longer hitched in his chest. Thoughts that had confused and frightened him before receded to the back of his mind as his eyes took stock of the situation. A wall of ninjas stood before him, armed to the teeth, and a forest filled with fire stood behind him. There was no retreat. He had only one option. Here and now, he would stand and fight. Naruto quickly gathered his chakra and launched into the midst of the sound ninjas, his fists finding flesh and bone. His leg caught yet another by his throat and slammed him into the ground. Then he twisted his body so that his other leg kicked out at the ninja approaching him from the left. All this happened in a split second, just before the enemy could gather their senses and counter him. He landed painfully on his ankles after his first wave of attack, and got ready for a second round by crouching, his hands dipping into his pouches for kunai and shuriken. However, the enemy surrounding him had recovered, and with a snort of amusement, one of them planted his fist into Naruto's solar plexus, sending him skidding across the rough ground. Coughing blood and feeling a rib creak in protest, Naruto stood. He'd be damned if he died here, no matter how many sound ninjas were looking at him like a trussed pig. The main problem was the number. He knew that if there were only 2 or 3, he would be able to eke out a win. With 10, though, he'd need a few more of his blonde self to pull out of this mess. More of him. His eyes widened as a thought occurred to him. Of course, there was one thing he could do to even the odds, after all. Sure, it was something that he had been forbidden to do by the third Hokage himself even before he had gotten into the special academy, but he would prefer to get yelled at by the old man than to kick the bucket. Let's go, you bastards! Naruto yelled as his fingers formed the seals to the one jutsu that he had mastered, shadow replication. Dash! Ignoring the stinging pain in his arm, Sasuke jumped to the side to avoid the water jutsu that sailed through the air. The spout of water formed by the sound ninja hit the ground just to the left of him, spraying dirt and grass everywhere. As soon as he found purchase on the ground, Sasuke reached into his pouch, pulled out several shuriken and threw them at the ninja who had yet to recover from performing the jutsu and nailed him in the neck and the chest. Without making sure that he was dead, Sasuke ran again, knowing that there were more enemies than allies in these woods. So far, he had killed 3, or was it 4, he wasn't too sure, and still, he had not seen anyone from his battalion. What the hell were they all doing? He briefly wondered where Naruto was, grimacing as he did, for it would not be at all like that idiot to miss out on the action. A sudden mass that appeared before him tried to take his head off with a sword, but Sasuke skillfully dodged and planted his foot into its stomach as he spun. Without pausing, he quickly formed seals with his hands and let out a breath of flame right into the face of the sound ninja who had dared to attack him. Sasuke hardly heard the muffled scream as he jumped out of the way before the smell of burning flesh could hit his nose. Then he was running again, looking around him for enemies and allies, his hands ready for anything that they had to throw at him. Something pink fluttered in his peripheral view, and being the genius that he is, he knew it to be Sakura. He saw a dark figure in pursuit of her, so he quickly changed directions to where she was running. Sakura was smart, but she wasn't exactly the best soldier. If he didn't help her, she would die, no question. When he caught up to her, he saw her standing with her back to a wall of fire, licking ever closer to her pink hair, kunai in front of her body in a classic stance. Yet, despite her form, he could see the shaking of her arms, the unshed tears in her eyes and the desperate hitching of her chest. When the sound ninja jumped into the air towards her, Sasuke jumped as well, and positioned himself in front of Sakura before the enemy could land. He felt his arm flex and tense as he blocked the hit that could have crushed Sakura's head in, and kneed him in the weak spot just beneath the sternum. Sasuke finished him off with a fist into his larynx, crunching the man's throat, and then swiftly kicked the body away. "You okay?" Sasuke asked without turning around, surveying the area around them for more enemies. His eyes burned strangely, and had been for a while, but he would not risk missing an enemy attacking him because of the damned smoke searing into his eyes. But then again, his vision was not blurry, nor was it hard to see in any way. In fact, in the last fight during Sakura's rescue, he had been able to see the movements of the enemy so much better, almost as if he could anticipate how the sound ninja would move even before he did. "Damn it, can you talk?" Sasuke turned and asked irritably, hoping that Sakura was okay and not incoherent with fear. She had to keep moving to survive, as he did, and he could not afford to have a dead weight with him. She merely stared at him, her jaw slightly agape, and he wondered if he really had to carry her. "Sasuke," he heard Sakura say finally, "your eyes. What of them? Come on, we have to get moving." With one arm, he pulled up the shell-shocked girl up to her feet and started tugging her along with him. She followed, her feet moving on their own accord, as her mind tried to make sense of what she had seen just then. "Your eyes," she continued, her voice soft but still audible, "they're red." "Yeah," Sasuke replied, his eyes busy scanning the area and his feet moving faster with each step, "it's all the smoke." "Can't help it." No, that's not it. Your irises. They are red." "Sasuke, your eye color is red." That made Sasuke pause suddenly, causing Sakura to run into his back with a thump. He did not notice, nor did he even feel her as she clung to his shirt. The only thing running through his mind was that his eyes were red. Red, and he could see things so much better. Red eyes. Sharingan. About goddamn time, Sasuke muttered and felt his lips lift into a vicious smirk. Guy and Kakashi stood back to back, ignoring the pile of corpses littered at their feet as more sound soldiers rushed at them. They worked in unison, killing the enemies quickly and efficiently, but it was far from quiet work. Guy was too busy bellowing out the number of the enemies that he had masterfully dispatched. "Aha, 14, and you shall make 15. And then the laughing, followed by the manly yawping. Kakashi wondered if his fighting partner thought he was in a battle or in a stage production. "I wonder how the kids are doing," Kakashi thought as he swiped his kunai across the throat of one of the enemies who stupidly got too close. "I know this is too much for them, but they can do this. They have to." The silver-haired commander of the 121 fought more viciously as he thought of those youngsters in his command. He was pinned here with Guy, and they could not afford to be here, immobilized by these ninjas, while his soldiers were fighting for their lives. Yes, he had hopes that Sasuke and Naruto would get stronger in battle, but he had thought that he would be there to help them through it. Instead, he had no idea where they were, how they were doing. All he could do was fight the best he could, believe in the abilities of his soldiers, and hope for their survival. Sasuke burst into the clearing with Sakura just behind him, ready to once again jump into a fight. How long he and the girl had run, he had no idea. It could have been minutes, it could have been hours, but that did not matter. They were still alive and relatively uninjured, which was more than he could say for all the numerous numbers of the sound ninjas they had encountered so far. True, Sakura had not helped any, but she had not hindered him much either. She had stayed out of the way when an enemy appeared, making sure that Sasuke could fight without worrying about her. She had kept up with the mad dash pace that Sasuke had set without complaint as well. Therefore, when they heard a gurgling scream just to the east of them, they had both run towards it unhesitatingly, knowing that someone from their side was fighting against the enemy in a heated battle. So when they ran into the clearing with weapons out and bodies ready to move in any direction, they had expected to run into a significant number of enemies. Instead, they encountered a sight that was so surreal and startling that their limbs froze from the scene laid out before them. First of all, there were Narutos. Not one as they had come to expect, but multiples of that blonde idiot. Plural. And they were all fighting viciously, each of them yelling out something that might have been a battle yell or a garbled insult as they threw themselves into action. More miraculous than the fact that Naruto had multiplied was that these boys were actually winning. Bodies of sound ninjas lay on the ground, some dead and others severely wounded, and the last two standing seemed to be on the verge of collapse. They were barely blocking the numerous hits that several Narutos were inflicting upon them, unable to go on the offensive due to the sheer number of the blonde. Sasuke watched, his red eyes flaring, as many Narutos gleefully beat up on the remaining ninjas. His Sharingan, his long-awaited birthright, saw what Sakura's eyes could not. He could see the flare of chakra around each and every one of the Naruto copies, as if they were all real people. This was not just a replication jutsu they had all learned, because these were real bodies. They were not mere illusions to fool the enemy before one attacked from a blind spot. These bodies had solidity, chakra, and thinking processes, if Naruto even possessed such a trait. When the last of the ninjas fell, all the Narutos before his eyes evaporated into thin air, disappearing in a cloud of pale smoke, every single one of them smiling triumphantly. Then there was only one left, the true Naruto, his smile showing his teeth and his blue eyes fierce. Blood spotted him in random places, gashes ripped into his uniform bared the tanned skin beneath, and dirt covered him just about everywhere. Naruto. You look. So. Sasuke did not finish that thought, and shook his head to clear it out of his head for good measure. For a moment, he had been so moved, his chest tight and his breath trapped somewhere between his throat and stomach. Why he would have such a reaction to his rival was a mystery, and it disturbed him on a level he had not thought possible. Yo, Sasuke, he heard the overly self-satisfied blonde say, wasn't that the shit? I am so good, oh yeah. He stood still while the widely grinning Naruto walked toward him and Sakura. No, not walk, but strutted, his chest puffed out and his arms swinging at his side confidently. Did you see, I kicked so much ass. The dark-haired boy had nothing to say to refute it. Had he not seen it with his own eyes enhanced by the power of his inherited talent? I got 10 of them, 10. Naruto continued boasting as he got ever closer to Sasuke, and I'm still standing. Not such a useless idiot now, am I? When Sasuke did not reply, Naruto felt his grin slip a little. Why was the stoic boy even more stoic than ever? The dark-haired genius had to have seen how well he had fared against those impossible-seeming odds, and he must be impressed with the jutsu he had used to achieve that victory. Why couldn't he at least smirk at him or something, just give him a reaction to show that he acknowledged his accomplishments? Not that he cared, But still, it irked him that Sasuke had no reaction whatsoever. Naruto, he heard a small voice behind the yet unresponsive Sasuke. What did you do? What was that? Belatedly, Naruto realized that Sakura stood there with Sasuke, her green eyes uncertain in her thoughtful face, regarding him with confusion and a bit of disbelief. How the hell had he not seen that the love of his life was standing not 3 feet away from him, getting closer with every step he took? Why was it that the only thing his eyes had seen was Sasuke, his dark hair blowing in the heated, fiery air as he exploded into the clearing, only to stand there immobile, staring at him all the while? You saw, didn't you, Sakura? Naruto smiled at Sakura through gritted teeth, his facial muscles ticking from the sheer force of it. If Sasuke was going to ignore him, well, he was going to do the same damn thing. The theory was eye for an eye, or something, so it was only fair that he pretended that Sasuke wasn't even there. I saw. Sakura paused, unsure about how to say what was on her mind. Naruto stopped walking towards her and Sasuke then, pausing at a spot directly in front of Sasuke, close enough so that if the blonde reached out, he could touch the unspeaking boy before him. You saw me. Lots of me. Cool, huh? Naruto continued with his huge smile, his eyes crinkling from the width that the grin had reached. If he couldn't impress his damned, too good for him rival, then he could at least impress the girl of his dreams. I did. They weren't just replications, were they? Right, that was shadow replication. Bet you didn't know I could do that. Sakura shook her head, her eyes never leaving Naruto's painfully grinning face, and she reached out to grab Sasuke's shirt for comfort. This wasn't Naruto, it couldn't be, right? Naruto was supposed to be the worst at everything, barely succeeding where she had excelled. Even during training when he had worked himself to the bone, he had not learned new jutsus like Sasuke or her. He had only been taught the basics of chakra control, something everyone had already learned by heart, and he had not even mastered that completely. That was Naruto that she knew, the failure, the loud-mouthed idiot, the one who would always try the hardest but never succeed in anything. This Naruto, the one who had mastered and used shadow replication, a jutsu that she knew to be forbidden due to its excessive difficulty and high occurrence of death during learning, she just could not know. This could not be Naruto. The cleanup after the sudden attack went quickly, the grisly task of gathering bodies and the wounded carried out efficiently in solemn quietude. Not much was said as survivors trickled into the main camp, some of them looking worse than the dead, their faces drawn and mouths silent. The battle had only lasted a little more than an hour, but the casualties were grave, the fifth line having lost more than a third of its numbers. The fact that every enemy agent had been eliminated before they had a chance to break through to Konoha served only as a minor consolation. Kakashi rubbed his headband covering his left eye idly, watching the grim scene before him. He was used to this kind of thing, seeing dead bodies of his comrades laid out in bloody repose, but such was war. They had won this day, but the cost was always too high, the price of victory always paid by lives. Yet, beside the grief, was a sense of relief. None of his battalion had shown up in the corpses, which raised his hopes that all of them had survived. How had this happened? How was it that a group so large had infiltrated so far into their defenses without being detected, only to launch an attack at the fifth line? It puzzled him to no end that this undetectable group of more than 400 ninjas had not bypassed the fifth line to go straight into Konoha. There must have been a purpose to attacking the fifth line. The infiltration had been too successful, too well thought out for it to have been anything other than planned out. Had they also planned on losing? If so, then why? What the hell was going on anyway? As he stood in the midst of medical care and body gathering, he saw faces he recognized straggle in from the edges of the tree line. He smiled when Guy, his eyes overflowing with happy tears, bear-hugged Lee as he came into the camp limping with Neji by his side. He pretended not to notice how Kurenai's face had nearly broken when Tenten and Shikamaru brought an unconscious Hinata, but laughed at her scathing reprimand to Choji, who had dared to come back dragging Kiba and his dog by the scruffs of their necks. His face mask was the only thing preventing others from seeing his smile when Shino, the boy with even less expression than the rock carvings of the Hokages, cringed ever so slightly from Ino's lamenting account of how she had nearly lost her beautiful hair to all the fire. However, the ones that he considered as his, the boisterous blonde, the stoic genius and the politely cheerful girl, they would not show up, even after the moon rose and the cleanup finished. The tiny crescent moon hung in the sky, illuminating very little to the 3 weary people occupying a small space between 2 large oaks. The bluish tint of the light gave all of them a harsh look, highlighting the cheekbones to create deep shadows that hollowed out their cheeks. They had no fire to ward off the chilling light, nor did they have food to stave off the hunger nipping their stomachs. What they did have was a tension so thick that it was suffocating them. They had not chosen to get lost during battle, but inevitably, that was what had happened. Sasuke could not believe that during his speedy dash in search for enemies, he had not taken into account what direction he had run. In fact, with all the adrenaline of battle flushed out of system, he could not clearly recall what he had done to win against the enemies who had come before him. All he could remember with any accuracy was the burning in his lungs, the tunnel vision of his Sharingan, and the feeling that Naruto had evoked. A small tilt of his dark head brought Naruto into his line of vision. The blonde was busy staring up at the sky, his back comfortably against the oak and his feet stretched out before him. He looked as if he was just stargazing, but the glaze of his eyes seemed a million miles away, seeing something that Sasuke could not see. Sakura shifted next to him, her body brushing slightly against his as she fell into sleep. She could no longer take the tension, the stress from this harrowing day. Everything had happened so fast, yet so slowly, making her head hurt. If sleep was her only avenue of escape, she would take it, if only to wake up in the morning with a better mindset to confront everything she had seen. When Sakura's breath evened out completely, Sasuke carefully stood, making sure not to wake her. She needed rest, probably more than either he or Naruto, because she was not in the same physical shape as they. It must have been hard on her, running for her life and not knowing if she would ever find safety. Naruto heard soft footsteps approaching him, but he did not turn his head. Instead, he lowered his head from contemplation of the stars to stare at his hands fidgeting on his lap. He had waited all day for Sasuke to say something to him, but he had gotten nothing. Even Sakura had stopped talking to him after he had told her the jutsu that he had used, the three of them trying to find their way back to camp in utter silence. Now, it seemed that Sasuke was headed his way, perhaps to say something, perhaps to walk right past him to something else. "Are you injured?" Sasuke asked softly as he crouched next to Naruto, his eyes searching the blonde's face and body for visible wounds. Though Naruto had splatters of blood on his clothes and skin, he could not make out any cuts or scrapes. "Did you get hurt?" Shrugging his shoulders, Naruto snorted and let out a soft chuckle. "What do you care, and why do you want to know now?" Not that he was bitter, God forbid. Shouldn't you have asked way before? Frowning at the antagonistic tone, Sasuke edged a little closer to peer into his surly rival's face. He noted that besides the permanent uniform scars of 3 lines running parallel down each cheek, the blonde idiot looked remarkably unscathed for being in a battle against 10 ninjas of high caliber. Sure, Naruto was good, he acknowledged in the silence of his mind, but damn it, he wasn't that good. He had suffered many injuries fighting the sound, from the stab wounds on his arm to the bone-deep bruising from well-placed hits. If he had sustained injuries, so should Naruto have, regardless of what jutsu he had used. Just answer the damned question. Sasuke pushed the urge to shake the idiot by his rock-hard head and tried to reason with him. You won't be any good if you hide that you're hurt. So that's what it was. What the hell had he expected? A measure of concern. The damned genius boy had not even given his shadow replication technique a cursory notice, and he had wanted to hear. What, worry? From this block of ice that masqueraded as human. "I'm fine," Naruto bit out as he turned his resentful eyes towards his uncaring rival. "And thanks for caring, asshole." Sasuke met Naruto's eyes without flinching, his lips pursed in thought. He had known Naruto was fine, but then again, even if the idiot was bleeding out from a sucking chest wound, he had a feeling that his loud-mouthed rival would say exactly the same thing. "Some of this blood has to be yours." "Yeah, it is." Naruto narrowed his eyes and set his jaw. It was rather disconcerting, the way Sasuke would not look away, the way he kept on looking into his eyes like he could see something beyond the baby blues. "I heal real fast, always have." When Sasuke only grunted and continued to stare, Naruto barely suppressed the growl rising in his throat. What, didn't the damned genius boy believe him or something? What was wrong with healing fast, anyway? It was pretty damned useful for a soldier to have healing abilities that allowed minor cuts close almost instantaneously and the major hurts wash away in only minutes. Sasuke could not fault him for that natural ability, could he? That is, Sasuke paused, not knowing how to say what was on his mind. He was glad that Naruto was a fast healer, but he would never say that to his blonde roommate out loud. There just was no way for him to say anything to Naruto to express how relieved he was that the blonde was really fine and not just saying so to look tough. He could not say any of those things. How could he when he could barely believe it himself that he felt in such a way? "Look, before you get into a snit," Kakashi said, "it's my own unique ability, okay? So just lay off, will ya?" Tearing his eyes away from Sasuke's intense black eyes, Naruto leaned back fully into the tree and crossed his arms in what he knew looked like a defensive gesture. But he could not help it, not when Sasuke had stared at him so steadily with that unreadable look in his eyes. He did not turn his head when he heard Sasuke get up and walk away, back to his place beside Sakura. So what if he preferred to be next to the pretty girl? If he could, he would have taken that spot next to his pink-haired crush. I do, you know, Sasuke said softly and unexpectedly as he sat down next to Sakura's sleeping form. You do what? Naruto asked wearily, shifting his body to find a comfortable position to keep watch. They still had no idea what kind of enemies was lurking in the darkness, just waiting for them to drop their guard. Care. In surprise, Naruto turned his head sharply to where Sasuke was sitting, trying to see if the genius ninja was making fun of him once more. But all he could see was the shadows that blocked out the pale face of his rival, hiding from him every delicate feature. Dash. The 9 members of Battalion 121 crouched around the fire pit, occasionally eyeing the rest of the people occupying the camp with them. What they were discussing was a bit daring, more than a little dangerous and definitely against orders. Still, they would talk about this and come to a decision together. Kurenai would skin us if she heard us, and she's the nicest one. Shooting Choji a glare that could have shattered rocks, Ino tried once more to advance her case. So what if they told us we couldn't go look for them? We have to, we're a team, aren't we? They had been talking about this ever since Kakashi and Asuma had told them that under no circumstances could they leave the campgrounds in search of the missing 3 of 121. Reasons ranged from the surrounding area still being too unstable for a bunch of inexperienced soldiers to go ranging to they had all sustained injuries that prevented full range of motion. All of it was valid, of course, but what did she care? Her best friend, the one girl who understood her and made her try her best, she was out there somewhere, lost, possibly hurt. What did Ino care that her commanding officers told them to stay put? There were some things in this world more important than following orders. She was not the only one who wanted to go find them either. She could tell that Hinata, though she said nothing, also wanted to search for the lost 3. The shy girl would never voice her opinion out loud, but the way she sat there, her fingers twiddling nervously and worriedly, told Ino's sixth sense that she wanted to go find them. It just isn't possible, we don't even know where they are. Shikamaru adjusted his torn uniform shirt with restless fingers as he looked around. Fire-lit faces of his comrades stared back at him, some with reproach, some with agreement. If we went out without knowing anything, we'd just make things worse. So, Ino gave Shikamaru a look so serious that it took him aback. If we can find a way to track them, it'd be okay to go find them. Damn it, woman, that's not what I'm saying at all. Why was it that women were so damn stubborn about certain things? You're so troublesome, I don't even know why we're talking about this. Before Ino could launch across the fire and break Shikamaru's nose, Neji reached out and restrained the blonde. They were supposed to have a discreet discussion, not get into a fight that could attract the attention of the entire camp. Look, Ino, Neji reasoned calmly, I know where you're coming from. Believe me, but some things just cannot be done. We have to wait and see if fate was kind enough to have let them live. Oh, screw you and fate, Ino hissed, stomping away from the fire and her fellow soldiers, knowing that she had lost this battle. All she could do was pray that the 3 of them, most especially Sakura, would make it back. Dash. Light sifted through the canopy of trees, creating small prisms of rainbows out of the morning dew still fresh on the grass. 3 people trudged through this beautiful sight wearily, walking in single file with their eyes scanning the area surrounding them. They had started their trek long before sunrise, Sakura being the only one who had managed to sleep for a couple of hours, trying to trace their way back to the camp that had to be in these dense woods somewhere. Sakura walked staring at Sasuke's back, keeping pace with the taller boy's precise footsteps. Something was still amiss in the air, and it wasn't just the tension left over from the previous day. Something new had occurred while she slept oblivious, something odd and serious enough that Sasuke and Naruto refused to even look at each other. Sasuke, she started, unable to stand the quiet anymore, are your eyes better? When he did not answer right away, she sighed, wondering if it was prudent for her to question him any further. However, he surprised her by turning his head towards her, showing her his handsome profile highlighted by the sun. My eyes were never bad. As if that explained anything. She suppressed an irritated huff, knowing that he did not mean to be so cryptic, and waited him to continue. She did not notice that Naruto had walked up closer to her, his ears perked. The red eyes were the Sharingan. It's an ability only the Uchiha clan members have. Sasuke continued walking as he spoke, still looking askance at Sakura. He was sure that Naruto was listening in on this conversation, how could he not with his curiosity and proximity, and he meant to let the blonde know as much as ease the disquiet from Sakura's mind. It allows me to see all different types of jutsu, and if so required, for me to copy them, elaborate and manipulate them. I thought I didn't have it, because it usually manifests at a younger age than mine, but as it turns out, I do. Sakura nodded, absorbing the information so freely given. She had never heard Sasuke say so many words at once, unless he was giving Naruto a scathing put down. More than that, he was talking about himself, something of a rarity from the intensely private boy. She smiled genuinely, her mind more at peace now that she knew nothing was wrong with Sasuke. If anything, he was even more impressive than before. Noticing Sakura's relief and the lessening of the worried tension in the air, Sasuke turned his head back to face the front, but not before he caught a look at Naruto's eyes widening at his news. Well, the damned idiot had surprised him the day before by pulling out a mass of emotions from the depth of his being, so it was only fair that he surprised the living crap out of the blonde by letting him know of his newly found talent. Besides, with his blonde head filled with the information about the Sharingan, he might forget that some things were said during the solitude of the night that Sasuke had not meant to voice out loud or otherwise. With some time, maybe he could forget it as well. 4 days and still, there was no sign of Sasuke, Sakura or Naruto. For 4 days since the battle had ended, the members of 121 waited with hearts in their mouths for the 3 lost ninjas to come into the clearing where their camp was, but there was nothing. Kakashi had even gone out into the forest surrounding camp in order to search for them on the 3rd day, but nothing had been found. It was almost as if they had vanished into the air, like they had been spirited away during battle. Tension ran high, the soldiers of the 121 snapping at each other without meaning to. All felt the stress from not knowing where the 3 were, whether they had lived or not, whether they had been kidnapped into the embrace of the enemy or anything else that might have happened. Yet, despite the worry and the need all of them felt to various degrees to find them, there was a war to be fought and duties to carry out. That was why at the end of the 4th day of waiting for their return, all the battalions stationed at the 5th line, .27 had to move out to a new camp site in order to strengthen defenses and plan a counterattack. They could not stand around for the 3 of them to return indefinitely, and as much as it pained the 4 commanding officers and the remaining 9 soldiers of the 121, they broke camp to move out to a new location in order to assess total damages and formulate future plans. Hey, Sasuke, Naruto whined, trudging behind the ever-silent Uchiha heir, how the hell did you get lost so badly? If Sasuke had not been thinking the same thing, he would have given Naruto a very nasty piece of his mind. Truthfully, after the 2nd day of wandering around the woods looking for signs of their camp or any tracks that could have led there, the dark-haired boy had been at a loss to explain why they were so damned lost. Surely, even if they had been lost in the beginning, it should not have taken him so long to find their way back. They had been trained in tracking, tracing their paths using stars and nature, therefore it was absolutely inconceivable that they would be lost still, on their 4th day of meandering. Why don't you stop the damned whining and use your animal instincts to find our way back? Sasuke stomped along ahead, not even deigning to turn his head to address his blonde rival. It could not be entirely his fault that they were in this situation, wasn't the damned loudmouth also a trained ninja? So far, all you've done is to eat most of our scrounged up food and driving me insane. Naruto glared at Sasuke's back, clenching his fists at his side. Ever since that first night when the enigmatic dark-haired boy had said he cared, the mood between them had been strained at best. The only times they communicated was to insult each other, to blame each other for some transgression or another. Yet, unlike in the past when the insults had been just a way to express their rivalry, it seemed that these sets of scathing remarks served another purpose. Just what that was, Naruto did not want to know, instinctively shrinking back from the answer that lurked just beneath the surface. An uneasy silence fell on the 3 as Naruto refused to rise to the bait and retort at Sasuke using various words that mothers told their children not to use. The only sounds heard were crunching of leaves under their feet and the ghostly wind blowing through the branches. Sakura felt her shoulders sag as she walked watching Sasuke's graceful back. It seemed like all she did was watch Sasuke or listen to him and Naruto argue. Sasuke paid her no mind except to occasionally make sure that she was still there, and even Naruto, who had been slavish in his attention on her, seemed to forget that she was with them. What the hell was wrong with those two? When had their relationship changed to the point where they saw nothing but each other, even if it was in rivalry and loathing? As she continued her silent watch and contemplation of her crush and her annoying stalker's relationship, She blocked out the flow of the argument that inevitably started up once again between the two boys. It was just easier to ignore them as they hurled insults and names at each other than to stand between them as a moderator. Although she had never meant to be in the middle of the arguments, invariably, there she was, trying to cut through the vicious name-calling and blaming, to no avail. She had given up soothing their flaring tempers and unease some time ago, opting to get lost in her own head with her private thoughts. She almost preferred the disquieting silence of their first day as lost lambs instead of this constant bickering that played her frayed nerves closer to the edge with each syllable. "Are we really lost?" Sakura heard Naruto accuse, "because it sure seems to me like we're just fucking circling the same spot." The blonde tucked his hands behind his head and carelessly let the words stream out. "Come on, genius boy, are you doing this on purpose just to piss me off or what?" The pink-haired girl let out a sigh as Sasuke tensed his shoulders and stopped walking. She knew that the boiling point had been reached, that the 4 days of stress, uncertainty and whatever the hell that had sprung up between the two boys were coming to a head. She wondered whether or not to interfere, if letting them have it out would relieve all the tension or it would just end up with her digging graves for the two of them. "Why the hell would I want to be lost with you? Do I look insane to you?" "Oh shit, you don't want me to answer that, do you?" Naruto grinned viciously at Sasuke's twitching face. "I don't see how I can answer that one." The blonde never got to finish his appropriately insulting reply since Sasuke chose to dive at him and knock him onto the ground. Naruto barely blocked a fist coming at his face and rolled free just in time to see his dark-haired rival forming a jutsu with his hands. "Shit, Sasuke," Naruto scrabbled backwards on his hands and feet as he tried to figure out what jutsu he was about to face. "Don't get so fucking serious. What the hell is the matter with you?" "What's the matter with me?" Sasuke halted forming the jutsu and stared incredulously at the stunned blonde. "Matter with me? What about you? Why the hell can't you just leave me alone? Why are you always pissing me off?" "That's what I do. Fuck, Sasuke, we're always fighting. What's so different now that you have to throw an ninjutsu at me?" Sasuke breathed hard as he glared at his rival, knowing that Naruto was right. They always fought. It had been like that since the day they had been assigned to the 121. And until now, he had never been so close to losing his control, enough of it so that he had seriously tried to injure the idiot blonde with a jutsu that he had not even thought to use during the battle. Why was it that Naruto got so easily under his skin now? Why the hell couldn't they go back to being rivals as they had been, instead of this new, amorphous thing they were now? All this only because he had said something he should not have in the night. All this tension, lack of control, this confusion had happened just because something in his heart and soul decided to go insanely stupid when it came to Naruto. "Will you two just stop this nonsense? We have better things to worry about." Sasuke and Naruto jerked their eyes to Sakura, who had yelled with uncharacteristic fire. She stood, her head bowed and covered by her length of pink hair that had turned ragged with the passage of rough lost days, her body shaking. She had had enough, damn it, of all the tension, the arguments, everything. They were lost in the woods, they had no idea how to get out of their predicament, and all the boys could do was snipe at each other. They should have better sense than this, they had been trained for it. "I'm sick and tired of listening to the two of you," she raged, "and I'm tired of being lost. I want to rest, I want to wash my hair. Stop this immediately." Naruto swallowed thickly, unwilling to show that he was shocked by her intense reaction. He was used to this, Sakura yelling at him for some transgression or another. It had been that way since he had laid his eyes on her when he was so young. But for her to show her ire to Sasuke, the one she worshipped as he worshipped her, that was downright rare. They must have been really getting on her nerves to have pushed her to the point where she could show her displeasure at Sasuke. I apologize, Sakura, for my behavior." Sasuke looked as if he had bitten into something unpleasant, but he did not falter. "I know we should figure something out, and I know I should not let the idiot get to me." He ignored Naruto's splutter that he was certainly not the only idiot in this group. "You are the smartest one here, Sakura. Have you figured anything unusual about this?" Surprised at Sasuke's apology and his plea for help, Sakura lifted her head to stare at the handsome face. His lips twisted in a mockery of a smile as he shrugged his shoulders carelessly, causing Sakura to smirk at his out-of-the-ordinary actions. "Well, I was thinking that we should not be this lost, no matter what the circumstance." Sasuke nodded, his eyes gliding past Sakura's thoughtful face to Naruto's irate one, only to receive a sour look from the blonde. Well, it wasn't his fault that all it took was one sentence from him to bring Sakura back to normal. "Have you thought that maybe, we're not lost, but forced to be lost? Now, That was something Sasuke had not quite considered. From the look on Naruto's face, it had not exactly crossed his mind either. Who would do something like that though? I mean, who could? Sakura tilted her head and considered Naruto's question carefully. In 4 days, they had not been attacked, had not sensed any enemy chakra or presence. That meant, either her theory was way off the edge or someone more skilled than they could ever imagine was playing with them. Someone that even Sasuke's newly awakened Sharingan could not detect. I think. Sakura cleared her suddenly dry throat. I think we're in a lot of trouble. Dash. The night fell softly, deathly around the 3 lost ninjas, the black ink of it surrounding them with unease and danger. Ever since their conversation earlier that day, they had become unbearably tense and alert, every muscle and nerve ending twitching from anticipating the moves of this unseen foe. They did not know who it could be, how much power this person had at their disposal, and most importantly, they did not know why this was happening. Was it only they caught in this strange trap, or had others of their battalion fallen into this situation as well? What in the name of 9 hells was going on here? Among the 3 of them, they had limited number of weapons. Naruto had 2 kunai, but one had either cut too closely to a bone or something equally as hard, because its edges were ragged and blunt. He had only 3 shuriken left, barely enough to take down one bumbling ninja, let alone someone skilled enough to have done whatever this was to them. Sasuke had even less weapons on him, having used his shuriken and kunai freely in his pursuit of the enemy, but Sakura had kindly relegated some of her weapons to him, seeing as how she had not actually fought during the battle. Still, their weapon stash was small and they were only beginners when it came to battle, no matter how many jutsus they knew, no matter that they had survived the first encounter with the enemy. The moon, a barely shining crescent in the sky, illuminated only enough for them to see shadows that seemed to move every time they turned their heads. Even with his Sharingan, Sasuke could barely make anything out. I hope you're wrong, Sakura, Sasuke whispered, because if you're right, and there is something out there, we will not make it out alive. Don't be such a dope. Naruto turned to glare through the darkness at Sasuke. We're gonna be okay. Sheesh, how can you give up before it starts? Do you even live in reality, idiot? Sasuke carefully calmed his madly twitching eyebrow, telling himself that he could not let Naruto make him angry. If we are really in some elaborate trap, it means genjutsu. Illusion. An illusion that my Sharingan can't see. Does that mean anything to you? Naruto stiffened his spine and walked up to Sasuke in even measured steps. So what if your fancy eyes can't see? He raised his hand to shove Sasuke lightly on his shoulder, forcing the dark-haired boy to step back to keep his balance. So what if we're up against something so damned amazing that it's making you say stupid shit? Naruto shoved his face very near Sasuke's seething one, his voice a study of fire and disappointment. You're my rival, ain't you? You're the guy who's always supposed to be better than me. So why the fuck are you so scared? Why are ya making me yell at you, huh? To Naruto's absolute amazement, Sasuke began chuckling that blew itself into a full-out laugh. The shorter blonde backed off a bit, regarding the rare sight of Sasuke's laughing face in the wan light of the bleached-out moon, not quite understanding what had happened. You, Sasuke gasped, trying to catch his breath as his laughter faded. You are downright impossible, you know that. His dark eyes shone like onyx as he stared hard at Naruto's surprised face so shockingly near his still. You don't get that you're supposed to be scared, do you? You don't understand that we're up against someone truly terrifying, do you? So what? Naruto crossed his arms defiantly, refusing to back away from this strange Sasuke who was laughing at him with that glint in his dark eyes. So, I don't get you, idiot. I don't get why your stupid, brash attitude should make me feel better. More than the laughing, more than Sasuke's earlier fear, this shocked the hell out of Naruto. Had Sasuke just said something that could qualify as nice, to him? Even if 70% of it was insulting. Oh, how lovely, came a disembodied voice to shatter this little moment, 2 friends who were so disgustingly sweet to watch. Instantly, all of Sasuke's laughter and Naruto's shock evaporated like water on a hot skillet, only leaving alert and ready ninjas in its wake. The red flare of the Sharingan came back to life in Sasuke's eyes, the dark dots surrounding his pupils circling madly in search for the body that went with the voice. Sakura found herself between Sasuke and Naruto the second the voice had rung out into the woods, her body protected by the 2 boys from either side. Her hands trembled lightly, but then again, why should not she be scared? Whoever was out there, he was much more powerful than all 3 of them. Hey, Sasuke, you see anything? Even though Naruto might have belittled the Sharingan before, he knew for a fact that the best chance they had lay in his rival's inherited eyes. How sad. The creepy voice started again, coming from all directions. The little blonde ninja can't do anything without the eyes of the Uchiha. How incredibly sad. Ignore it, Naruto, Sakura said gently, you know better than letting that get to you. A slithering laughter echoed in the night, making Naruto tense more and Sasuke's search more frantic. Where was this guy? How sweet, the encouragement from the pretty, useless girl. You three have been quite funny, but very sad. None of you can even see this jutsu, not even you, possessor of the Sharingan. Another round of icy chuckling followed, the sound made colder by the night and the shifting shadows. I'm so very disappointed, my dear last of the Uchiha, my dear brother. Sasuke stopped breathing, his eyes stopped scanning as he finally recognized the intense, frightening voice in the wind. Brother. Itachi. The hated name escaped his numbed lips before he could think, earning him a sharp look from Naruto. He did not notice the look nor that he had dropped the kunai he had in his hand. The only thing he knew was that his brother was out there, taunting him, letting him know that even now, after he had grown and trained, he was no match for the brother he had so admired and then hated. Something smelled terribly wrong, like rotten eggs buried deep beneath the earth. Not that it was an actual tangible smell, more of a feeling nagging at the back of his head, but nevertheless, something was definitely wrong. Kakashi narrowed his visible eye, his arms at his sides unconsciously reaching for shuriken in his pouch, as he tried to figure out just what was so damned wrong that his senses were going haywire. Maybe he was just out of sorts because of the missing members of the 121, but he doubted it. The feeling, this smell that seemed to ripple in his brain, screamed danger, the kind that dripped blood and caused nightmares. He had not felt something like this since he was a young man, just barely trained in the arts of the ninja, facing a foe that had nearly killed him. That had been 8 years ago. He was one of the best Konoha, if not the world, had to offer now, and yet, that terrifying feeling from 8 years ago was tickling at the edges of his consciousness. Damn it, get yourself together, Kakashi, he muttered, admonishing his foolishly distracted self from dwelling on the fear grabbing hold of him. If something was so damned wrong, then he would go check it out, not sit here and contemplate it to death. However, he would not go alone, he was not an idiot after all. He hoped Kurenai or Asuma would be up for some scouting based solely upon his gut feeling, because however antsy he was to check out this thing nagging him, there was no way in hell he'd ask Guy. He'd rather burn his precious book first. Naruto spat blood pooling in his mouth out onto the ground, coughing to return some oxygen into his lungs. Everything hurt so badly, from his head kicked so swiftly and violently to his left ankle that he knew was broken. Barely supporting his pain-racked body with his arms, he tried to stand, but his amazing healing abilities had not yet caught up to the damage dealt to him by the one Sasuke had called Itachi. His blue eyes swiveled to the prone and unmoving form of Sakura who laid only a couple of feet away from him. If it were not for her chest moving shallowly, he would have thought her dead. When the attack had come at them so suddenly and from a direction he still could not discern, Sakura had been the first to go, one hit to her face enough to knock her out completely. Not that he had fared any better, for in the next second, he had been on the ground, tasting copper and feeling pain like he'd never experienced. Slight shift of his eyes brought Sasuke into his line of vision, and what he saw dropped his already drumming heart into his feet. In the low light of the moon, he saw Sasuke held against a tree by his throat, his feet dangling off the ground by a good foot. The dark-haired boy was clawing at the hand holding him, his face twisted into an expression so hateful and fierce that Naruto thought that maybe he was looking at someone else. Hold on a sec, Naruto gasped as he forced his body to move, I'll be right there, so don't you give up, you asshole. Sasuke did not hear Naruto's encouragement, did not even notice that the injured blonde was basically crawling towards him and his brother. All his eyes could see was the face that had plagued his nightmares and revenge fantasies for 8 years, smiling grotesquely at him. His brother had changed, he noted absently. He had grown taller, broader, and startlingly, more like their father. Dear brother, Itachi murmured, is this all you have to offer? Gods, if only he could breathe. If only his limbs would obey him, then Itachi would be nothing more than a bad memory. But he could not move more than his hands tearing at the strong grip at his throat, could not voice the rage that gurgled in his head. Damn him, Sasuke could only seethe, damn him to the 9 hells that spawned him. Your Sharingan is incomplete, my younger brother, his brother taunted, only 3 dots total. Not nearly enough to touch me, let alone kill me. Suddenly, Sasuke felt air invade his lungs as Itachi threw him, almost too casually, into Naruto who had almost made it to them. He felt his body crash into the blondes and they skidded in a tangle of limbs and new pain on the ground. All this effort just to see if you were fit, and you only disappoint. Itachi drawled, walking towards the fallen pair on silent feet. I sacrificed most of my reserve forces just for you, brother dear, and you are not nearly ready. Are you truly the avenger you claim to be? How long must I wait for you, little brother? Sasuke raised his head to watch Itachi approach. He could see the Sharingan in his brother's eyes, so much like his yet so different, glowing like heated steel in the dark. They were so much more frightening than the ones he saw in his dreams, held more power than he had thought possible. What could he do, as he was, against his brother who had always been so much better at everything than he? What could he do against this one man who had had the power to slaughter every member of the Uchiha clan 8 years ago, save him? His hands fisted in the earth, railing at him for his inability to do anything. He had sworn vengeance against Itachi all those years ago, but now that he was faced with his brother, all he could do was lay on the ground, looking up at the face so eerily like his, unable to get up. So this is it, Sasuke gritted his teeth, this is the end, how I will die. He turned his head in shame, unable to face his brother walking towards him, unable to swallow the thick taste of humiliation, and his eyes fell on Naruto groaning back to life next to him. Idiot, Sasuke smiled sadly, stay down. It'll be easier. But as always, Naruto would not listen. Sneering around the blood staining his mouth, he wobbled to his feet, wincing when his broken ankle caught awkwardly on the stony ground, but he stood. Then he held out his hand for Sasuke, who only stared up at him in disbelief. Sasuke, you bastard, the blonde grated, get the fuck up. We ain't dead yet. Itachi stopped in his advance to consider the stubborn ninja with blazing blue eyes and the wild golden hair. If anything, the boy had guts, but still, that would not be enough to defeat him. Amusing. Very amusing to see that you can't admit defeat. Shut up, bastard. Naruto turned his eyes away from Itachi's sardonic smirk and his coldly gleaming eyes to look down on Sasuke. How many times had he dreamed that he would be the one standing over Sasuke, that he would be the one to save his rival from certain doom like heroes were supposed to do. He had dreamed it so often that he lost count, but damn it, it was not supposed to be this way. In reality, the Sasuke he knew would never ask for help, need help, from someone like him. In reality, the Sasuke he knew would be on his feet, ready to face whatever enemy that came at him. He just had to make sure Sasuke went back to what he was supposed to be. Hey, Sasuke, get up. Let's fuck this guy up, yeah. Naruto, you idiot, Sasuke half laughed, do you even know who we're up against? A hysterical edge cut into his soft voice like glass shards in flesh. Of course not, why would you? You're just an idiot who can't understand anything. Yeah, you're right, I am an idiot and I don't understand anything. Sasuke watched in unabashed awe as a smile dawned on Naruto's face, his eyes shining bluer than the summer sky and somehow brightening the suffocating night around them. It was a smile filled with faith and belief, a smile that warmed him throughout his body, chasing away the crippling fear and shame that had filled every nook and cranny of his system. I may be an idiot, Naruto continued through that blinding smile, but you ain't. You're the best at everything, right? You always succeed, right? Why should it be any different now? How do you do that? Sasuke wondered as he reached out his hand towards the one Naruto had extended earlier. How the hell can you change me like this with just a smile and words? When Sasuke stood by his side, Naruto turned his head to the enemy ahead of them, standing with that damnable smirk still present on his face. He felt Sasuke do the same, concentrating on Itachi, but as much as he was lost in assessing the enemy, he did not fail to notice that Sasuke had yet to let go of his hand. So, we're going to take him down. Damn straight. Naruto grinned savagely and tightened the grip on Sasuke's hand in his. They were in this together, as it should be. The silver-haired man ignored Kurenai's slightly trembling statement as he made a lengthy jump from the tree branch. When he had found Kurenai and Asuma earlier drinking tea and settling in for the night shift, they had shrugged nonchalantly at his concerns and had only come after deciding that it would do some good to get exercise. Then as they jumped branch to branch towards the direction Kakashi felt the most wrongness, they had felt it as well, and now, mere half an hour after this pursuit began, all three were uneasy and nervous. The smell, as Kakashi had termed it, grew in strength the more they moved westward towards the site of their old campgrounds, the scent of danger intensifying with every step. Asuma bit down on his unlit cigarette hard, nearly severing the butt in half, as he pondered the situation at hand. This ugly feeling had not existed during the battle 4 days ago, he would have noticed it then with his heightened battle senses, but it was related, he knew it. Something in his gut told him that the real reason for the attack lay behind this dangerous crackling in the air and that it certainly related back to the missing ninjas of the battalion. Only if he knew how it all connected, then he would not be feeling like he was walking blind into a cave full of traps. "We're getting closer," Kakashi announced, breaking Asuma's revelry. "Let's step it a bit, shall we?" The three commanders of the 121 became faster than the wind, their forms blurring into the woods and the night enveloping them. Something was happening, and they would be damned if they missed it. Sakura opened her eyes despite all her neurons telling her that it was not a good idea. She agreed when pain violently racked her head as soon as the weak moonlight hit her pupils. Groaning softly, Sakura squinted to focus her eyes, but the world was a blur of dark colors. "Sasuke, good gracious," was that her voice that sounded like sandpaper over a chalkboard? What had happened? Slowly, her memories presented her with visual images and oral sensations, all of it culminating in a vicious hit that made her see stars, then nothing at all. "Oh, yeah," her sluggish thoughts said, "I was knocked out." Her eyes had yet to focus on anything, but her ears made out distinct sounds ahead of her. She heard clink of metal bouncing off each other, the sickening soft thuds of landed hits on soft spots of a body, and the occasional suppressed gurgle of pain. Overlaying all these sounds of a furious fight was a constant mocking laughter, the one that had sent shivers down her spine before the world went blankly dark. Ah, yes, how could she forget, even in her state of confused semi-consciousness, that a man named Itachi had been hunting them? Oh gods, came the unbidden thought, as that, ignoring the pain, Sakura opened her eyes and forced them to adjust to the night and the light. Eventually, she saw shapes form into bodies and shadows transmute into faces. Sasuke and Naruto were fighting against one man, and they were losing badly. Naruto had long ago abandoned everything Kakashi had taught him about taijutsu, his limbs having numbed from the pain. It was all he could do to dodge the mockingly nonchalant hits dealt out by Itachi, let alone launch an effective counterstrike. He moved only on instinct, letting his body react before his mind could process the results, swaying like a windblown willow, keeping his balance only by sheer power of his will. Out of the corner of his swollen right eye, he could see Sasuke fighting just as hard as he, and just as desperate. The dark-haired genius eyes flickered from dark to red, the chakra required to maintain the Sharingan having depleted some time ago. Still, determination etched every weary and achy line of his face. Sakura lied still on the ground, watching Sasuke and Naruto as they fought Itachi, who did not even have to move in order to avoid their attacks and jutsus. She saw that with every move Naruto made, a fresh stream of blood from some wound would snake out into the air, dully reflecting the cold moonlight before it splattered onto the already soaking ground. She winced when Sasuke kicked and was brutally blocked, hearing that awful crunch that signified a major bone break. "I have to help, I have to help." The mantra ran in her head over and over, but she could not force her body to move in order to carry out that mission. Her arms shook every time she even thought about moving them, her legs gave out before she could put weight on them. It was as if her body was telling her to stay down, stay out and pretend just to be dead. Sound of branches snapping made her turn her head, her eyes taking in the sight of Sasuke as he sailed through the air along with the tree parts that got taken out by his body. Her green eyes widened and filled with tears and panic when Sasuke landed on his back, air forced out of his lungs along with a smattering of blood. Slowly, painfully, on shaking hands and knees that threatened to crumble, she crawled towards his prone form, trying hard not to draw any attention to herself. If Sasuke had been dispatched so easily, she stood no chance, and it would do no one any good if she got killed by being careless. The nearer she got to his body, the clearer she could make out the numerous injuries that he had sustained. He still coughed blood, every choking wheeze bringing a fresh supply of the life liquid pouring out of his mouth, and the way he breathed, that wet, gurgling sound, told her that he had a punctured lung. He was covered in blood. She had no idea a human being could lose so much of it and still live, but thank the gods, he was alive. Labored breathing, the twitching fingers in the earth, they all told her that even if he was so wounded that his eyes glazed over in incomprehension, he was still alive. Carefully, mindful of the injuries, Sakura cleared the dark hair away from his handsome face and cradled his head into her lap. She could not be sure if Itachi could see her trying to help Sasuke, but since she had not been attacked, she assumed safety. What was that Kakashi had taught her about medical treatment? She recalled his lectures, the techniques that he had shown her, how he had explained the use of chakra in order to heal. She had never done it before, but she knew the theories by heart. If she wanted to help Sasuke, she would have to do this. So far, all she had done was watch him as he fought in her stead, protected her from every threat. In the least, she could heal some of his injuries and bring him some comfort. Closing her eyes, Sakura centered herself and formed her chakra, her head a calm space of Kakashi's voice intoning everything she needed to do in order to heal someone. The sounds of the still ongoing fight faded from her ears, the feel of death and blood receded, and soon, only the feel of her chakra flowing out of her and into Sasuke remained. She no longer cared that her own face throbbed or that her head hurt, because in the center of her being was Sasuke, slowly regaining his consciousness as she poured herself into him. A muffled groan snapped her out of her revelries and reality crashed back into her harshly. The vague twinge she had distantly identified as a headache became a full-grown monster of a migraine, pounding into her skull in cadence to the dancing spots of light in her eyes. The strength she had left had been spent in order to bring Sasuke back, and it was all she could do not to fall onto the boy face first. "Sasuke," she whispered, her heart hammering in her chest, "are you okay?" For a short moment, there was nothing but Sasuke climbing back into the conscious world, his breathing harsh but no longer watery. When his eyes opened, Sakura's breath left her in a swift exhale. His eyes, the color of the darkest night, looked up at her with a fierce conviction. "What?" Sasuke began, unsure of where he was. "What the hell happened? Is it over?" Before Sakura could answer, a short scream echoed in the air followed by a heavy sound of a body being driven into the earth. In unison, Sakura and Sasuke turned their heads to see Naruto, face down on the ground with Itachi's right foot grinding him ever deeper into the rocky soil. Naruto's fingers gripped the earth, the loose dirt sifting through the digits, as he tried to get up, only to be thwarted by the powerful man standing on him. "Are you recovered, brother dear?" Cursing silently, Sasuke shook off Sakura's restraining hands and rolled over onto his stomach, his eyes flickering back into the red of the Sharingan. He could feel his chakra draining as he did, having used too much in this impossible fight against Itachi, but he would not leave Naruto to fight alone. He had left him alone for too long already, it seemed, picking up his slack while he had passed out. "Not quite 100%, I see." Itachi threw his head back and let out an echoing laugh, his left hand idly flipping a kunai into the air. "Your friend here, I admire his fire. He's quite interesting." Growling, Sasuke gathered his legs, forcing strength he did not have into them. He had to stand, damn it. This fight was supposed to be his and his alone, the goal of his life, the reason that he joined the special academy, the wherefore of his training. Naruto should not even be there, moaning under the grinding heel of his murderous brother. If anything, that should be him. Let go of him. Sasuke rose onto his knees, his eyes never leaving the form of his brother, and his hands began forming a jutsu. His vision narrowed to a pinpoint, only seeing Naruto struggling and Itachi laughing, as he formed the final seals and gathered his chakra. He would save Naruto, get them out of here away from his brother. As much as the idiot had boasted, there was no way to beat Itachi here and now, but if they could just get away, if they could just survive, then there would be another chance to face his brother. A burst of flames and smoke flew towards Itachi, illuminating the night with a ruddy color as it traveled faster than Sakura's eyes could track. The ground around Itachi exploded and blazed when the fire jutsu hit, throwing Sasuke and Sakura back with the force created from the explosion. Dust was still settling when Sasuke hastily raised his head to look for any signs of his brother. Smoke obscured his Sharingan vision, but he stared out into the smoking crater. He had to have some kind of damage to Itachi with that, it was the most powerful jutsu he knew. However, his hope was dashed rather quickly when a figure without a scratch on him stepped through the swirling mist of dirt and smoke to throw a limp body at him. "You almost toasted your friend, Sasuke." Itachi mused as Sasuke scrambled to Naruto's side. "You must hate me more than I thought if you would sacrifice your friend to hurt me." "I did not sacrifice him," Sasuke replied angrily. Even so, his hands skimmed over Naruto's unconscious and singed form to check for injuries he might have inflicted. When he concluded that all of Naruto's injuries were from Itachi and not from him, relief at not hurting his friend washed over him. Yet, close behind the relief was a roiling emotion he could not define, boiling hot and steady, ready to rip out of his pores. It reflected in his eyes that could no longer hold the Sharingan, turning the glossy black into a pair of lightless pits. "I do hate you." Sasuke picked up Naruto, his arms almost breaking at the added dead weight, and somehow stood. Without looking away from his grinning brother, Sasuke deposited Naruto on the ground as far away from Itachi he could get without losing sight of him. "I am an avenger. Hatred for you is what keeps me going. Killing you is my goal." His voice went dead, belying the raging fire that burned in his body. "You cannot be forgiven." Sasuke touched the blond boy gently across his scarred cheek, his eyes lingering on the slack and bloody face for a second, before he limped towards Itachi. He could not win against him, oh he knew that quite well, especially alone. But Naruto should not have been involved in the first place. This fight was between them, the last two remainders of the Uchiha clan. He stopped only once on his approach towards Itachi, when a hand grasped him by his bad ankle, the grip so light and hesitant that it could have been the wind. Sakura, Sasuke monotoned, let go. This is crazy, Sasuke, he heard her moan, her voice shaking and wet, let's just get away from here. I thought that we could. I thought that if we distracted him enough, we could run and fight another day. Sasuke shook off Sakura's hand and continued his short trek towards the figure waiting so patiently for him. But he won't let me. Finally, he stood before his brother, his right arm out and his left arm held slightly above his waist, the stance for his most favored taijutsu. He had no chakra left, practically no strength left, and his mind blurred with exhaustion and pain. Still, he had to fight. Take care of Naruto, Sakura. Burying the crushing jolt of pain that ran up his frame, Sasuke attacked. The first thing Naruto saw when he opened his eyes was Sakura crouched on the ground next to him, her head buried in her hands. He heard the hiccuping noise that emerged from her hidden face, and it took him a bit to figure out that she was crying. What the hell? That thought was quickly followed by a wellspring of panic. Sasuke. He tried, he really did, to get up, to stand, to even fucking crawl, but nothing responded. His arms remained at his side, his legs refused his commands and even his head could not swivel. Of all times to be paralyzed. Sakura, please, please look at me and tell me what the hell is going on. The words swam in his head, but he could not voice them. And despite all his pleadings that echoed in the vault of his mind, Sakura continued to cry into her hands, and he could only gauge that the situation was truly bad if that was her reaction. Sasuke can't be dead, because... He paused in his ramblings, not quite knowing why he had such monumental faith in Sasuke and his abilities. Since when had he admired his rival so much that he could not even fathom the dark-haired boy failing in anything, even believing that he could win this fight against Itachi? Think later. Move now. Sakura's sobbing grew distant from his mind as he concentrated on nudging his unresponsive limbs to action. When Sasuke had been knocked out, he had barely managed to keep Itachi busy enough so that he would not go after his rival. He had endured everything that came at him, thrown everything he had at the damned sinister ninja, but even so, it had not been enough. Now, he could hear Sasuke putting up a fight, most likely trying harder than he had since this seemed to be a personal matter for the boy, but he knew it could not last. Granted, he admitted, Sasuke was a better ninja than him by far, but even when the two of them had been fighting together, the odds had been very much against them. Therefore, as he lay here like a lump of dirt, Sasuke was getting his ass handed back to him. I can't feel my legs. His eyes squeezed shut, his lips formed into a snarl. I can't feel any chakra in me. Damn it, heal faster. Is this all you can do? The blonde heard Itachi sing, his voice carrying like feathers in the wind. Is this all you have, Sasuke? Sasuke, keep fighting. Naruto silently screamed as he dug deeper in himself to find the strength. Keep fighting. I'll be right there. I'll be right there. I'll be. Somewhere in this body, there had to be something left, anything. Something had to be there, something he could grab onto, whether it be the last vestiges of his will to survive or the final burst of strength one gets when there is a dire emergency. Find it, damn it, and get the fuck up. He struggled to find the power to stand, retreating further and further into himself, and the sounds of Sasuke's battle merged with the roaring of blood and frustration in his head. It created an incomprehensible noise that sent his mind spiraling, the sightless vertigo stifling his mind like a coffin. Soon, everything became darker than the deepest of moonless nights, his mind cutting ties with reality and sinking into this disturbing new shadow. Dimly, Naruto realized that he was lost in his own mind, drowning in his quest to find the power that he needed to help Sasuke, to help himself. Well, this is fucking rich. Sasuke's so going to laugh at me after this. The thought drifted and sank, Naruto following in its wake. I sure do know how to make a situation worse. If he had a form here in his mind, he might have laughed. Well, he certainly was fucked now, wasn't he? He might have drifted forever in his mind laughing at himself if it weren't for a shaft of crimson light that suddenly snared him in its ethereal grip. It pulled at him, tugging him, until he had to acknowledge it. As soon as he did, a powerful voice broke through the shade of his mind to show him the way. Deeper, go deeper, the voice rang, palpable power undulating within it with every syllable. Go past the darkness, past the person that is Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto reached out and felt razor-hot inferno sear his mind. Deeper, deeper, The voice commanded, and he followed without regards to the burning that surrounded his inner mind. Come to me. The white-hot conflagration that surrounded him licked at the edges of his being, scorching the bits and pieces that made him Uzumaki Naruto, seeping into his pores only to burst back out. It hurt, dear Lord, did it ever hurt, but Naruto continued towards the voice, ignoring that small voice that told him to run. Closer, closer. The fire consumed him, and from the ashes rose a demonic visage, teeth snapping and grinning terribly. Dash. It had to be too soon for sunrise, but Sasuke's pain-confused mind could only think that the red glowing light emanating at the corner of his eyes had to be the sun rising. The light broke the darkness in half, illuminating the trees and the grass in crimson, coloring his brother's madly grinning face in blood and fire. Wearily standing a scant foot away from his brother, Sasuke risked turning his eyes away to the source of this new light and saw Naruto in the middle of it, shining and glowing like a backlit ruby. Well, there's something interesting. The excitement trembling in Itachi's voice startled Sasuke, the sudden surprise enough to make him lose concentration needed to stay upright. His legs gave and he fell heavily onto the ground on his side, his eyes still on the shining Naruto. And I was beginning to think this was a waste of my time. Itachi purred, the words grating on Sasuke's nerves, as he stared avidly at Naruto's approach. This is going to be quite an exercise. Sasuke watched from his low position on the ground as the glow subdued, becoming barely visible by the time Naruto got close enough to see clearly. His blonde rival was still covered in blood, but the healing process must have kicked into overtime for there were no visible wounds. It relieved Sasuke to see that Naruto had recovered, but a bigger part of his soul shook at the implication of the red glow and the feral, toothy smile that graced the blonde's face. Naruto, is that you? Sasuke thought, his eyes raking over Naruto, why do you look so different? Why are you? Not you. While Sasuke watched dumbfounded, the blonde stretched, his arms reaching to the skies above his head. Itachi never took his madly circling Sharingan off Naruto, not approaching the apparently unguarded boy, his smile a sight dimmer than it had been a second ago. Lazily, Naruto brought his arms down and patted his legs rhythmically, finally turning his head towards Sasuke who lay on the ground speechless and powerless. Sasuke, don't you look pathetic just laying there? I guess it's up to me to get this bastard out of the way. A fissure of fear spiked through Sasuke. Naruto's voice had not sounded like the usual Naruto. The voice had been laden with so much malice, but more than that, it had quivered with palpable power. And the way he was standing, so relaxed and loose as if he was on a stroll, was wrong. Then there were his eyes, the eyes that Sasuke knew so well, the blue of the skies and the seas. They were not blue any longer, but a color that resembled the blood that stained the golden of his hair, a red lit from behind with interspersed flecks of gold. Everything about Naruto had changed, screaming wrongness and power, a combination that could not bode well for any of them. I can almost taste it, Sasuke, Naruto continued, blithely trampling over Sasuke's concerns and shock, I will taste the sweetness of blood and death. A growling laughter erupted from the blonde and he crouched low, his hands in front of him curled like claws. See me, Sasuke. Let me show you death. Sasuke saw Naruto launch himself at Itachi, the smile never fading, and felt the impact of Naruto and Itachi's opposing chakras as they collided. The maelstrom of chakra and power twisted in the woods, sending his battered body flying from the center of it all. Sasuke barely felt his body land, barely heard Sakura's terrified screams, his eyes could not leave Naruto and Itachi locked in battle, their feet digging deep into the ground and chakra swirling like a hurricane around them. Naruto, what are you? Why do you have this power? That was Sasuke's last coherent thought, then the world faded to crimson and he knew nothing more. Dash. Kakashi stopped, his heart thumping wildly his throat. Next to him, Asuma and Kurenai also paused in their mad pursuit of the wrongness as they all felt the intense power washing over them in waves. The silver-haired man swallowed thickly and gripped the tree trunk by him hard enough to leave cracks in the bark. This power, this feeling. There are two chakras, wouldn't you say? The masked ninja was rather surprised that his voice had not trembled with the fear rocketing through his body. He saw Asuma nod in agreement, his face as tense as Kurenai's. 1. I haven't felt it since. Kakashi paused, not knowing how to verbalize the scene swimming in his head. He was saved the trouble by Kurenai who finished his thought. 8 years ago, the Uchiha massacre. Yes, Kakashi could never forget the feel of that chakra, the chakra of the man who had nearly killed him and then mocked him as he coughed his internal organs out of his mouth. Yet, the chakra was so much more powerful now than he remembered, so much more powerful than what he could muster. Hell, it was more powerful than his, Kurenai's and Asuma's chakras combined. The second, Asuma lit his cigarette and inhaled to disperse the knot of terror. Is the demon. The nine-tailed demon. The seal is breaking, then. Kakashi grimaced, his eyes trained in the direction of where these chakras were coming from. The situation was pretty damned bad. Not only was there the man who could take all three of them out without breaking a sweat over that way, but the seal of the demon bound was breaking. This was something that they were not prepared to deal with. In fact, as it was now, it might only be the third Hokage himself with a platoon of the best ninjas who could deal with the situation at hand. However, that was not an option they had. So, you guys ready? Kakashi straightened and he shifted the crooked headband on his forehead. His left eye emerged from behind the band, the eye that had made him a legendary ninja in his own right. Ready? No. Going. Yes, Kurenai quipped, her lips in a smirk that would send lesser men fleeing into the woods. It's not like we have much of a choice. It's a good night to die. So it is, Asuma. Kakashi answered, let us not fear death. The three ninjas took off as one, heading steadily closer to the center of swirling inevitability. Thanks for watching. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.